Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of what if Deku was an Omega abandoned by his heroes? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Could fate ever be called fair? 80% of the population is born with a power called a quirk. 20% of the population are born without a quirk, quirkless. 40% of the population are born with the secondary gender of alpha, theoretically the strongest. 40% of the population are born with the secondary gender of beta, theoretically neither the weakest nor the strongest. And finally, 20% of the population are born with the secondary gender of omega, theoretically the weakest. Izuku was living proof that fate was not fair. Only a 20% chance of being an omega. Only a 20% chance of being quirkless. Only a 4% chance of being both. And Izuku had somehow landed on that rare 4%. And he paid hell for it his entire life. Bullied, shunned, and despised for factors of his life that he could not control. His own mother, his closest friend, and every person he came to meet from the time he was 5 years old. At first, Izuku never paid any mind to the way his mother's gaze didn't match the loving and devoted gazes of that of his friend's parents. In the furthest parts of his mind, he knew it was almost resentful. But he paid no mind to it. He couldn't care, not when his father looked at him as if he hung the stars in the sky. Hisashi Midoriya, the hero of Izuku's entire world. The day he was born, Hisashi loved him, not caring at all to the fact he was an Omega. If anything, it only seemed to draw him closer to his newborn son. Though as Izuku grew, he fell in love with heroes, and he dreamed to be one. Though when the dreadful day came when Hisashi took his son to the doctor to figure out why his quirk hadn't appeared yet, the poor boy was devastated to learn the truth. And even more, devastated when he saw his father's face fall. He would never be happier that his mother had skipped that appointment. And Hisashi would never learn that night Izuku had heard every word his mother screamed at his father, claiming Izuku was completely useless. It was the first time Izuku had heard such cruel words from his mother. But it would never be the last. The poor boy was already bullied for being an Omega, though he never understood why. His father always praised him for his second gender, always claiming that Izuku was a rarity and that he was to be proud of being an Omega. So, it was easy enough to ignore his peers' cruel words about his status. But when the day came that it was announced he was quirkless, Izuku finally learned why he was disliked for nothing more than his mere existence. Why even his oldest friend had abandoned him. Omegas were weak, they were nothing more than nuisances for the people of society that could contribute positively. Omegas were nothing more than mothers, nothing more than to just be child-bearers who will raise the next generation of alphas and betas. Quirkless people couldn't contribute to society, they were useless, and they had no purpose than to stand below those who were gifted. Izuku learned the true meaning of cruelty that day. Not only from the one he had once called friend, but from the woman he was forced to call his mother. That night Izuku cried and cried, left alone in his room, the scrapes and bruises from his classmates only a minor pain compared to the heartache he felt. The heartache of learning that he was declared to be useless at birth. And learned that not even his own mother was on his side. That night he learned the true resentful nature behind her gaze. He learned the true reason behind his mother's distance from him. That night his father found him curled up in his closet, sobbing as he hugged his bunny plushie close to his chest. That night, Hisashi's heart broke at the sight of his darling son, the light of his life, sobbing his poor heart out, crying to his father, begging him to tell him that his predetermined fate was in fact not true. That there was a way he could be useful, that he wasn't what everyone told him he was. That night was the first of many fights he and Inko would have. That night was the first time he had ever heard his wife, his mate, call their own son such cruel names. All because of something he was not in control of. That night was the first time Izuku ever saw the alphan rage that his father was capable of. It was the first time he had ever heard his father cuss. It was the first time he ever saw his father bare his teeth. It was the first time he ever saw his father lose his composure and use his quirk, burning a vase of flowers with his fire breath. It was the first time he ever saw his mother use her quirk to try and hurt his father. And it was the first time he ever saw his father cry. His hero, the man who had shown him nothing other than pure love and utter devotion his entire life. He cried, and apologized to Izuku. He was apologizing for the actions of others. Apologizing for society's cruel and wrong perspectives of Omegas and the quirkless. He cried because he saw his son cry. He cried because of the wounds that tainted his child's creamy pale skin. He cried because he knew that his son would never be judged for his character first, rather than the status he had no control over. Izuku never knew his father could cry. He never knew the man that had always held his head up high, who had such a powerful aura that he could lead an entire hospital, the father who had never once raised a hand against Izuku, who had never raised his voice to his son, and taught him with patience and understanding, could cry. But as his father continued to apologize as he sobbed and took Izuku into his arms, Izuku learned what true love was, just as he learned what true cruelty was. As Izuku grew up, he was constantly told he would never be a hero, but he refused that notion. Because he knew one way or another, he'd be a hero. Whether or not it was like All Might or like his father. He didn't know, but he didn't care. Because he swore he'd be a hero. One way or another. And Hisashi couldn't be prouder of his son's persistence. He couldn't be prouder that his son took to trying to learn everything there was about heroes, along with learning everything he could about the world of medicine. Determined to either be a pro-hero like All Might, or a doctor like his father. But Izuku learned quickly that fate was never fair. Every day felt the same. Though Izuku knew that theoretically speaking, that was impossible. There were a few different things, such as the breakfast his father would make. Or at times what lunch would be, or on rare occasions, Inko would be tolerable, not shouting or making him and his father miserable, but instead even offering to cook dinner. Izuku enjoyed those days, the days where he could pretend that his mother did actually love him, that she did in fact care for her only child. That she and his father were in a loving marriage, held together by the devotion and love they had for one another, instead of spite and blackmail. But of course, some things would never change. Such as the path he walked to school, he'd always pass by Mrs. Tori's small shop, making small talk with the woman. She once again offered the boy a place to work at her quaint flower shop. Though each day Izuku would always have to politely deny, reciting each day that his father wished him to only work when he became 17, wanting his son to live in his childhood for as long as possible. And each day Mrs. Tori would only smile and nod, handing Izuku a thermos full of chamomile tea, wishing him a pleasant day at school. But just as routine, it was never a pleasant day. Another thing that never changed was the taunts that came the minute his peers would see him. Most would just giggle mockingly as he passed, others would just ignore him completely, nothing more than a ghost to them, and then there were the ones who would take things too far each day. Shoving him into lockers, calling him cruel names, and going as far as to physically attack him. Those things never changed. But Izuku had grown used to it. The taunts and mocking giggles fell on deaf ears, nothing more than white noise to the boy. The shoves into his locker, he would write them off as nothing more than an accident or a strong breeze that came in through an open window. And the physical attacks. He did nothing more than either avoid the boys that always came after him, or he wouldn't react as they beat him. He would go into his blank space. Or at least that's what his father called it. But Izuku liked to call it the clouds. He felt nothing when he was there. It was like the world would go black and he would hear nothing, he would feel nothing. The space was safe. But his father didn't like it. He said it was unhealthy. He said that Izuku should come to him if he feels the need to go into that space. But that was another thing that never changed. He had no control. It was as if his body would react before he could. He would be pulled into that space before he could even blink. But sadly, there was one bully that he couldn't go into that space when he was around. Katsuki Bakugu. Or Kaken. Izuku never understood why. He never understood why the harsh voice of the blonde alpha could always pull him out of that space, why he could never retreat to the clouds when he was around. Izuku almost wanted to hate him for it. Not because he harmed Izuku, not because he abandoned him when they were children, not because he would allow his friends to gang up on Izuku, but because he would never let the Omega have his peace. The boy had long since grown numb to the pain. It was routine, just as was his mother's daily ranting before his father would come home, complaining to Izuku each day that he should have had a quirk, or been something other than an Omega, claiming that it was his fault her marriage was falling apart. But Izuku couldn't stand the way that Katsuki Bakugo alone had the power to truly hurt him. It could just be by words. But it still hurt. It hurt in ways Izuku wasn't prepared to handle, no matter how each day it happened, no matter how routine it was. It still hurt as if it was the first time, every day. But there were good parts of his daily routine. Once the hell he called school was done, he would always leave quickly, bypassing the popular kids, or the kids Izuku knew would have to start over completely by next year, especially with their bad attitudes. Izuku would always go to a park before going by Mrs. Tori's and returning her thermos and then going home. The park was almost always empty, except for one boy who had made a habit of waiting for Izuku there. Ijiro Kirishima. Izuku had met him by chance. It was an accident. He had broken routine and skipped school. He knew that his father would be alerted, and he would most likely be scolded, but he didn't care. He wanted a break. And apparently, he hadn't been the only one to want a break. The Ravenet had been sitting alone under a tree, playing on his phone while Izuku had accidentally snuck up on him. Kirishima was kind to him. He didn't judge him for being an Omega, nor did he care that he was quirkless. Izuku would be forever grateful he broke routine that day. Kirishima was a huge fan of Heroes as well. They talked about All Might and Crimson Riot for hours, laughing when the other made jokes, and both admitted to why they had skipped school that day. Kirishima had a bullying problem as well, despite being an alpha, which did confuse Izuku, but regardless, strangely, he had been relieved to know he wasn't the only one. And Kirishima was sympathetic to Izuku when the boy explained his own bullying issues. And that day when he came home, he was able to skip his mother's daily rants, and while he was scolded for skipping, he happily told his father every detail about his day with his new friend. And while Hisashi was a tad bit upset that Izuku had skipped, he was happy to learn of Izuku's new friend. And today was no different. "Izuku, time to wake up, hun." Hisashi called through Izuku's door, knocking gently, startling Izuku awake. He had once again fallen asleep at his desk, studying his father's old medical book. Despite Hisashi's insistence that Izuku should read more teenager-themed books, and that he'd have all the time in the world to study when he was older. "I'm coming, Dad." Izuku called back, quickly running to his bathroom and jumping in the shower once he peeled off his clothes, only to shriek at the cold water, though it heated quickly and Izuku was able to maintain his title as world's fastest shower taker. Izuku didn't bother drying his hair, knowing that it would fluff back up to its normal curly bush of green locks. That was one thing Izuku had inherited from his mother, her green hair, though he got the curly-headed gene from his father. The alpha's short hair was a curly mess most of the time, the same as Izuku's. Though both of the Omega's parents had green eyes, Izuku always chose to say that he had his father's green, not his mother's. Izuku changed quickly, his uniform hiding the bruises that decorated his pale skin, hiding them from his father. But was one thing Izuku had learned. Never let Hisashi see the bruises or the scrapes and cuts. The last time Izuku had come home crying to his father about the wounds that covered him, his father had lost it. He marched to the school and demanded that every child responsible be expelled. Though the school did nothing, merely having an assembly about bullying the next day, Izuku once again came home with scrapes and cuts. Hisashi was furious and kept Izuku out of school for a week, bringing the boy to the hospital with him every morning, though, after a week, the school called and claimed that Hisashi keeping Izuku out of school was illegal and that they would call authorities if Izuku would not be back by the next week. The alpha was livid with the school. He had enough physical evidence on his son to get every teacher at Izuku's school expelled for misconduct. But he knew that even then, the next row of teachers would treat Izuku no better. If anything, they'd isolate him, most likely learning that it was Hisashi that got the teachers fired. And Hisashi knew the school truly didn't care. They just called so the police wouldn't go to them. Hisashi knew that if the police did enough research, they'd find enough evidence to shut down that school. But Hisashi didn't want to DMN his son to live a life as a social outcast because of his outbursts. So, reluctantly, Hisashi allowed Izuku to go back to school. But he made Izuku promise to come to him if the bullying continued. If only Hisashi knew that Izuku would not keep his promise. "Good morning, my little button flower. How did you sleep?" Hisashi greeted his son cheerfully, flipping the pancakes on the stove as he handed Izuku the glass of milk he had already poured for him, along with the vitamins he insisted Izuku take to ensure that he grew healthily. "I slept good, Dad. How about you?" Izuku questioned as he took his vitamin pills, though he raised a questioning eyebrow when Hisashi smirked teasingly at his son as he plated their breakfast, seating himself next to the Omega as he grabbed his coffee and the peanut butter and chocolate chips. "I slept well, most likely much better than you. I can only imagine how much pain your poor spine is in. Torturing it with that desk and chair you stubbornly claim as your bed. I'll have to set you up with a chiropractor by the time you're 20. Hisashi teased while Izuku huffed at his father, spreading the chocolate chips on his pancakes before folding them burrito style and letting the chocolate chips melt, creating an chocolate chip pancake sandwich. "I don't sleep like that all the time, Dad. I just fell asleep reading again." Izuku tried to defend himself as he took a bite of his chocolate burrito pancake. Hisashi only smirked teasingly as he spread peanut butter on his pancakes. Sure. Say Izuku's spine, how are you feeling?" Hisashi questioned teasingly as he looked down at Izuku's back. "I'm in pain. Help me, Dad." Hisashi imitated Izuku's voice while the boy blushed embarrassedly at his father's teasing, stuffing his face as he glared playfully at his father. "You hear that, Izuku? It's crying out in agony." Hisashi gasped dramatically while Izuku snorted, trying his best to make sure he didn't sneeze milk. "You're ridiculous, Dad." Izuku laughed while Hisashi only chuckled as he scarfed down his pancakes. Izuku did the same before taking their dishes and washing them while Hisashi grabbed his bag and his coat. "Tell Mrs. Tori I said hello. Also tell her you're allowed to work in the shop when you're 17, Hisashi orders playfully while Izuku laughs as his father circles around after grabbing his things and kissing Izuku on the head. "I'll see you tonight, button flower. Anything specific you'd like for dinner?" Hisashi questioned while Izuku smiled. "Chicken and rice, please." Izuku smiled while Hisashi nodded. "Got it. Love you, button flower. Have a good day." Hisashi called as he went to the front door and left. "Love you, Dad." Izuku called after his father before he closed the door. But as his father left, Izuku was alone in the house once again. Izuku always thought it was too quiet. His mother left for work long before Izuku or Hisashi got up, then she'd be back by 1 o'clock, already done with her day. She was a real estate worker, so she always left early. Which never made much sense to Izuku, but he never questioned it. He had learned from the last time he had asked. He was only 7 years old, and he had asked why mommy never had breakfast with them. Izuku was too young to understand the pain that his father felt, or why his expression darkened. But regardless, Izuku never asked again. He didn't want to see that sort of expression on his father's face ever again. But he saw it again and again and again. Each time his mother would retreat to her separate room, or when Hisashi would come home and she would be drinking again, or when she would start a fight. That expression became a daily feature on his father's face. But even still, Hisashi always smiled so brightly for his son. So, Izuku could do the same. Izuku never liked that quiet, and there was no reason for him to stay at home. School didn't start for another 2 hours, but Mrs. Tori was always a good conversationalist. The boy headed off, locking the door behind him and putting his headphones on, blasting the music his father proclaimed chicken scratch. The people that walked past him were like blurs of speeding cars. It was as if they were all going faster than light, and he was walking like a snail. Izuku didn't mind it though, because it would always stop when he made it to Mrs. Tori's. "Hi, ma'am," Izuku called as he entered the flower shop, the amazing aroma of all of the different flowers instinctively causing him to relax. "Oh, Izuku. My dear, how are you, my boy?" Mrs. Tori called. The elderly woman was a sweet old lady, a beta. She had big circle-rimmed glasses and always wore a solid-colored dress with a white cardigan, claiming it is always cold despite it being summer. The woman's brunette locks were cut into a pixie style while bangles and bracelets decorated her wrists, but only her engagement ring and wedding band adorned her hands. And she and her husband, Hattie Tori, had owned the flower shop, the Flora Gem, long before Izuku was born. She had known his father personally, welcoming the man when he moved back to Japan from his studies in America. She thought that Hisashi was a foreigner and didn't know any Japanese, and the woman had always known English, so she welcomed him in the best English she could muster, only for Hisashi to surprise her as he spoke fluent Japanese. From then on, the elderly woman would travel from her neighborhood to the Midoriya household, occasionally with her husband, to share a meal with the Midoriyas, though ever since Izuku had been 5, it was rare that Inko would join them. When Izuku was first born, Mrs. Tori was Izuku's first babysitter, claiming to be his adopted granny, though Haida Tori was able to calm her wife upon seeing Izuku for the first time, so she would crush the small baby Omega, despite her being twice her wife's size, an alpha. The Taurus had been one of the few people who didn't care at all about the fact that Izuku was quirkless or an Omega. And in a similar fashion to Hisashi, Mrs. Tori was absolutely smitten with the boy since the day he was born, and even more so after he was diagnosed as quirkless, seeing as she was in the same predicament as him. And so, the Taurus became family to the Midoriyas, and just as routine, Izuku would walk into the flower shop and greet his adopted granny. "I'm doing just fine, ma'am. Were there any good sales this weekend?" Izuku questioned while Mrs. Tori came around the counter and hugged Izuku. She towered over the Omega, the same 6 feet 3 inches height as Hisashi. Though Izuku had learned early on that she was nothing compared to her husband. The female alpha a whopping 7 foot, not too many but enough. Mrs. Tori nodded as she led Izuku to the small coffee table decorated with vines in the corner. She pulled out the thermos of tea from her heater that she kept by the door, the tea already prepared, as she handed the boy his tea while grabbing her own from the counter. "So, anything fun going on at school this week? Have you read any new books?" Mrs. Tori questioned while Izuku smiled and nodded. "My dad let me read Neuroscience Level 3 this weekend. I haven't finished it yet, but it's still interesting." Izuku preened while Mrs. Tori laughed. "Oh, my dear, I swear it, you are the only 14-year-old that I know that would willingly choose to read something like that." Mrs. Tori laughed while Izuku chuckled sheepishly, knowing it to be true. "Well, I do find it interesting." Izuku smiled while Mrs. Tori smiled gently at the boy. "I understand, dear, but don't forget to be a kid too." Mrs. Tori ruffled his hair, while Izuku giggled and nodded. The two chatted idly as they drank their tea, and when Izuku ran out, the elderly woman pulled out a teapot from seemingly thin air and poured a refill into his thermos. Though when Izuku saw that he only had 30 minutes before school, he stood and collected his things, and hugged the woman goodbye. Leaving the flower shop was always a reluctant part of his routine. But Izuku was nothing if not a creature of habit. As Izuku put his headphones back on, the people blurred once more as he sipped his tea, people watching where his vision was not blurred by his own mind. And upon reaching the hell he called school, Izuku sighed as he took the back entrance. Izuku practically sprinted to his locker, unpacking his bento box and placing his tea thermos in his locker, along with the books he wouldn't need until his next class. The boy then closed his locker and swiftly ran to his class. He still was 20 minutes early. But he had learned the hard way that being the last one to class was far worse than being the first. "Easy now, Izuku, I don't want you to trip." Ms. Himari was the only teacher that had actually treated Izuku fairly. The woman was a fun teacher, at least in Izuku's book. She was open to her students sharing their ideas, or even having a bit of an attitude, so as long as they were still respectful. "Yes, ma'am." Izuku nodded while the woman giggled at the boy as he quickly scurried to his seat near the window. "Hun, you know you can sit up here?" Ms. Himari questioned while Izuku only smiled at his teacher as he pulled out his notebook. "No, thank you, ma'am. I like the window seat if you don't mind." Izuku shook his head politely while the teacher only smiled at the boy and nodded. "Sure thing, honey." The woman spoke softly as she went up to the board and wrote down the instructions for the class. As Izuku's classmates filed into the room, Izuku could only focus on a few faces. But once again most of the people blurred like lights. It was something that Izuku could never bring himself to try and understand. But there was one person that never blurred. Bakugo. The blonde's harsh voice cut through even his deepest thoughts. And Izuku could do nothing more than keep his head down as the blonde took his seat. "Can't even effing you greet me, huh, Deku? Thought you had better manners?" Bakugo gruffed as he looked behind him to the Omega who sat behind him. Izuku only raised his head slowly, careful of his expression. But regardless, he nodded to Bakugo, politely smiling softly while the Alpha clicked his tongue in annoyance and turned back to the front of the class, placing his feet on top of his desk while Izuku sighed in relief, relaxing his head on his desk as he looked out the window and daydreamed of better times. He and Bakugo had once been such close friends, their parents all being friends, so by association they met and grew up together. Back then, Bakugo had never once spoken a word of ill will against the Quirkless or Omegas. The boy didn't care that his best friend was an Omega, all the two cared about was what bugs they could find when they played in the woods. Back then, Izuku remembered that small and now meaningless promise that was made to him. "We're friends, stupid Izuku. I'll be the one to protect you." That was the promise. That was what had always kept Izuku around. Perhaps it was the promise of stability, or maybe it was just because of his loneliness. He had no clue. But he had fallen for that fake promise. And by doing so, he sealed his own fate. Once Izuku was shown as quirkless, things slowly began to change. Bakugo would hang out more with the boys who were either betas or alpha, the ones who had quirks. Izuku was always confused. He was confused about why the other boys treated him harshly, but he was even more confused when Bakugo stopped coming to his aid, and when he started calling him Deku, and joined in on the bullying. Though at the snap of a ruler, Izuku looked back to the front of the class, the teacher catching everyone's attention with the ruler slap. It was easy after that to pay attention. Schoolwork was never what made Izuku hate school. If anything, it's the only reason why he tolerated the hellhole. But it wasn't the work that he hated. After class, the bell rang, and Izuku waited. It was routine. He knew to wait. When a hand slammed down onto his desk as he put his book away, he looked up and saw one of Bakugo's friends, but no Bakugo. Good, Izuku was always better at dealing with these idiots than he was the blonde. "Hello guys. Do you need anything?" Izuku questioned politely, standing from his seat and grabbing his backpack, though he looked over one of the boys' shoulders to see where Ms. Himari had gone. That was one thing Izuku hated about the teachers, they always left too soon. And nothing much, Deku, just wanted to check on our favorite little guy after the weekend. Didn't see you at all. Kamuri Hashiga. In Izuku's opinion, Hashiga wasn't the worst. At least not in comparison to Bakugo and Akero Tsubasa. He was cruel with his words, but he never did anything worse than shove Izuku a bit. Hashiga wrapped an arm around Izuku's shoulders, leading him out of the classroom with Tsubasa right behind them. Izuku had learned early that it was best to just follow them, that if he just played the part they wanted, it would all be less painful. And just as Izuku counted down from 10, once he reached 1, Tsubasa shoved him into a locker roughly. The few onlookers that walked past kept to their own routine, not swaying their gazes to the poor boy held by his shirt collar up to the lockers. "You know, I thought I heard some attitude from you early? Is that right?" Tsubasa lulled tauntingly as he punched Izuku in the gut, causing the Omega to wheeze as he tried to hunch over to hold his stomach, only for the boy holding him to the lockers to slam him back against them, and Izuku did his best to try and act the part of scared, but he had grown numb to this a long time ago. There wasn't much that scared him anymore. "No, I don't think so. I'm sorry if there was." Izuku apologized sincerely, despite not meaning a single word, and despite the way his ribs screamed in pain. Oh, look at that, he knows how to properly apologize to his superiors. Isn't that just a good little Omega? There were Hashiga's cruel taunts. Just as he had expected them, they always somehow hit a little too close to home for Izuku's liking. But as Tsubasa raised his fist, Izuku looked down and closed his eyes. And then, he was gone. He was in the dark again, but it wasn't scary to him. He was floating as if he were an astronaut in space. Opening his eyes always was strange when he went into this headspace. There were stars here, he saw them, but at the same time it was as if every single light in the world had been snuffed out. Izuku didn't feel anything while he was here. He only felt the sensation of floating, and he wondered, is this what it feels like to die? This peaceful sensation all around him? Was that what death was? Was this the fate's little mercy they had on him, allowing him to experience the peace of death in short intervals? Izuku! His name was being shouted. He didn't know by who, but he knew he had to leave again. The peace never lasted. As Izuku opened his eyes, he groaned and whimpered at the feeling of the new bruises and his busted lip. But when he fully opened his eyes, it was Ms. Himari, and she looked close to tears. "Oh Izuku, gods forgive me, I'm so sorry. Sheet, I forgot those little beasties always do this." The teacher apologized sorrowfully as she wiped away the blood from Izuku's lip. Izuku could only smile at the teacher, thankful that he at the very least had her. "It's okay Ms. Him, I'm fine." Izuku tried to convince his teacher as he stood up, but he realized that it wasn't just his ribs and lip that were damaged. "Izuku. Hun, this isn't okay, I'm so sorry that it's like this, the school system is so effed up. But don't lie to yourself and say you're okay." The teacher tried to reason with him, but Izuku could only nod, he didn't like to lie. So, he kept quiet. Ms. Himari only sighed heavily before she brushed a few hairs out of Izuku's face and straightened the boy's blazer. She grabbed a few wet wipes from her pocket, ripping open the packaging with her teeth as she wiped and dabbed away the dirt and blood on Izuku's face and hands. "There we are, such a beautiful boy." Ms. Himari preened as she cradled the side of Izuku's face while the boy could only giggle. "Thank you, Ms. Himari." Izuku bowed his head respectfully to her, though the woman only enveloped him in a hug in response. "Next time, hun, stay in my classroom, or better yet come up to the front of the class and stand by my desk while the others leave. I know you won't tell me who your bullies are, but I have a few guesses, so I'll have you stay in there until they all leave, okay?" The teacher offered while Izuku nodded, hugging the woman in response while Ms. Himari sighed sadly as she petted Izuku's hair for a moment. "All right now, let's get you to your next class. I'll write you a note saying that you were helping me put books away." Izuku nodded as he followed his teacher back to her class to collect his note before going to his next class, which he was 5 minutes late for. School went by in routine after that. Izuku heard the taunting giggles and whispers in the halls, he felt the cold eyes that were no doubt judging him or taunting, and he labeled every shove as an accident. But as the day finally ended, Izuku wasted no time in heading out, doing his best to get out of the classroom before Bakugo and his friends. Izuku pretty much ran to the back exit of the school, thankful that no one had caught him as he sprinted off to the park. The people became blurs again, but Izuku was thankful for that, it made his journey feel faster. Once he reached the park, he was thankful, just as always, to see Kirishima sitting under the tree, trying his best with his math homework. "Hey Kiri!" Izuku called cheerfully while the Ravenet quickly looked up from his book, clearly having not been focused on it at all. "Hey Mito, holy sheet. What happened?" Kirishima immediately sprung up, dropping his phone and book on the ground as he ran forward and grabbed Izuku's face, inspecting his busted lip and the small bruise that sat on the bottom corner of the right side of his mouth. "I'm fine Kiri." Izuku patted his friend's shoulder, though he couldn't move to Kirishima squeezing his cheeks as he inspected the wound. "Diaminute. Was it those BSTRDS at your school again?" Kirishima questioned while Izuku sighed and nodded to the best of his ability. The Ravenet growled as he released Izuku's face and sat against the tree once again, crossing his arms while his brows furrowed in frustration and thought. Izuku merely sat next to him and patted his shoulder. "Dininit Mito, why can't I just come to your school, just one day, and rough em up a bit? I might not be the best fighter, but I'm sure as hell manly enough to get those assholes to quit." Kirishima offered as he punctuated his sentence by hardening his fists and punching them together. This had been an offer repeated for what was most likely the 100th time. But just as he offered, each time Izuku would shake his head no, he knew that Kirishima had his own battles to fight. He refused to drag him down into his own. "It's okay Kiri, soon we'll be in high school and it'll be okay." Izuku tried his best to sound cheerful, and Kirishima only nodded sadly, but still kept a grin on his face. "Sure, thing Mito, and know what? You're going to either be the greatest hero there is, or the best demon doctor, which I will need when I'm a pro. So, if you don't mind, I'm kinda hoping you teeter more to the doctor's side." Kirishima chuckled sheepishly while Izuku laughed openly. That was one thing that he had shared with Kirishima, his dreams. He told him how he dreamed to be a hero, and if he couldn't make it as a pro, he hoped to be a doctor like his father. "Don't worry Kiri, no matter which side I'll go, I'll be there to patch you up." Izuku promised while the alpha only hugged Izuku tightly. "Damn it, man. You're so manly," Kirishima declared as he made a dramatic hand gesture while a single tear shone in his eye. Izuku openly laughed at the dramatics of his friend, allowing himself to fall out of the hug and into Kirishima's lap. The Ravenet looked down at the boy in his lap, grinning dopily with his shark-like teeth, which Izuku, for what was most likely the millionth time, grabbed Kirishima's mouth and opened it, playing with the razor-sharp teeth, not at all fearful to the fact that it was very probable that Kirishima would only have to bite down to take off one of his fingers. Kirishima hunched over lazily as he kept his mouth open and let Izuku play with his teeth, knowing that the boy had no doubt already cleaned his hands if the smell of soap and hand sanitizer was any clarification. But as a few hours passed, Izuku sighed heavily from his spot on Kirishima's lap, the two never moving from their positions except for Izuku turning around so Kirishima could use his back as a table of sorts while Izuku helped him with his homework. "Time to go home?" Kirishima questioned while Izuku nodded sadly. That was one thing Kirishima always wished to ask Izuku about. Why did he always look so scared or sad to go home? "Hey, Mito." Kirishima started hesitantly as Izuku pushed himself up from the alpha's lap and grabbed his bag, sitting on his knees as he nodded for Kirishima to continue. "Is there any reason why you're so scared or sad to go home?" Kirishima questioned as he noticed Izuku bite his lip before whimpering at the sore cut on his lip. The Ravenet then stood up and pulled Izuku with him, hugging him reassuringly while the boy buried his face in the crook of the alpha's neck. "You don't have to tell me, Mito, only if you want to. I want to make sure that you're safe. That you're okay." Kirishima explained softly, scrunching his nose anxiously as Izuku stayed silent, only to startle when he heard soft whimpers and sniffles come from the greenette. "Mito, are you dash dot? I'm okay, Kiri, sorry. I'm just really happy that I met you. And that we're friends." Izuku laughed out a sob as he wiped away his tears, looking up at his friend while Kirishima teared up as well and pulled Izuku back into the hug. "Me too, Mito, we're best friends, got it?" Kirishima asked as he quickly wiped away the few tears that made it past his barriers, resting his head on Izuku while the greenette hummed in response. The two parted after a minute, staying in the hug a little longer before they waved each other goodbye and Izuku headed to Mrs. Tori's to return her thermos. After that, getting home was like walking down a dark hallway in a horror movie. The people didn't walk fast, nor did they blur in Izuku's vision, they merely walked slowly, as if warning him to turn back. But what horror movie protagonist ever listened to the warnings? As Izuku entered the house, he took off his shoes and looked around, being sure that either his father or his mother was home. Though as he walked further into the house, hesitantly, he heard giggling and what sounded like a man's laugh. "Oh no, not again." Izuku thought to himself as he ignored the better part of his judgment and slowly opened the door to his mother's separate bedroom. If there was one thing Izuku could at least be grateful for, it was the fact that at least his mother held enough respect for his father that she didn't do these sinful acts in the sanctity of their shared bedroom. As Izuku opened the door, he cringed at the sight of his mother in nothing but a bra while she was cuddled up next to a man with white hair and golden eyes, though Izuku already despised him. Not because he was a stranger in his house that clearly did unspeakable things with a married woman, but because he had the audacity to smoke in his house while also letting his scent roam freely. It disgusted Izuku. "Oi, Inko, is this kid yours? Or is he some street rat that just came out of a dumpster?" The man laughed tauntingly while Izuku only glared heatedly at the man. He was clearly an alpha, which only made this disrespect worse. Izuku knew that the stranger had smelled his father's scent everywhere around the house, and still chose to be so rude as to try and overpower the head of the house with his own scent. "I'm her son," Izuku stated bluntly as he turned his glare to his mother, who was already tying a robe around herself, thankfully sparing Izuku a sight of his mother he prayed he'd never have to see. Inko strode forward and closed the door behind her as she grabbed Izuku and pulled him into the kitchen, glaring at him as if he was the one who just committed the crime of infidelity. "What do you think you're doing?" Inko scolded while Izuku tried to think of exactly what it was she was asking. "I think I'm walking in on my mother cheating on my father for what, the millionth time? In his own home. If you're going to be unfaithful, do it somewhere else." Have some dignity for yourself and your husband. He takes care of you, of us. Show him the respect he deserves by at least cheating on him outside of his own home. Izuku shouted. That was one thing he never did. He was terrified of his mother, but he despised the way she treated his father more. So, his anger overrode his fear. Inko glared heatedly at Izuku, clearly having not expected the yelling or receiving her own scolding. And before Izuku could blink, a stinging burn sensation bloomed on his cheek from where his mother's hand struck him. But even as the tears welled in his eyes and fell down, he never ceased his glare. You act like you're so mature, Izuku, but you're not. You're a stupid kid who thinks he's smart. And I am your mother. You will show me nothing but respect. Do you understand me? Inko shouted as she grabbed Izuku's jaw and forced the boy to look her in the eyes. I'll show you respect when you give me a reason to. Izuku hissed while Inko struck him once again. Though Izuku didn't care. Izuku, honey. You know why I do this, don't you? Inko questioned as she gently caressed Izuku's still stinging cheek. I don't . Because of you, honey. Inko lulled sweetly as if she was a hero, as if she was doing something so incredible. All for Izuku. The boy couldn't help but flinch at the statement as he looked away from his mother. I . I have to do this because your father and I can't be with each other with you. It's your fault we're like this, darling. Inko whispered sweetly, her voice laced with honey as she began to twirl Izuku's hair through her fingers, caressing his face gently as if she was showing him nothing but love and adoration. Izuku held back his tears and sobs at the gentle touches. Despite the cruel words, all he could focus on was the sweet and gentle touches. He wanted nothing more than to lean into them, to hug his mother and let her do this, let her do whatever it was she wanted, so as long as she kept holding him like this. He didn't care if it was fake, he just wanted this, even if it was only for a second. It's your fault, darling, that's why your father and I can't be together anymore. Inko lulled as she began to pull away from Izuku, only for the boy to reach out and hug her, and hold her as close as possible. He cried, his tears staining his mother's robe as she kept her hands off of him, only making Izuku cry harder. I'm sorry. Izuku apologized while Inko stared down at her son as she began to run her fingers through his hair again, soothingly rubbing his back while Izuku whimpered as his tears fell from his eyes in waves. Izuku wished that their physical difference could be enough to snap him out of this, that the way his knees cried out in pain at the way he bent them so he could be held by his mother as if he were a kid again, but Izuku was numb to the pain. Don't talk to your father about this, Izuku, Inko commanded, her voice harsh, and Izuku could only hate her for it. He was smarter than this, he knew what she was doing, but each gentle touch, each loving caress kept him in place. Kept him silent. I can't . If you loved me, Izuku, you'd do what I'm asking. Do you not love me? Your own mother? Inko questioned, her voice laced with venom, a dripping poison that Izuku could feel burning into his heart. The boy only sobbed as Inko gently raised his head and wiped away his tears. She looked at Izuku with love, as if that's how she felt about him his entire life, but he could see the threat in her eyes, he could see the hatred. And Izuku didn't know what he hated more about his mother at this point. You love me, don't you, Izuku? Inko questioned while Izuku began to tremble as his mother only continued to wipe away his tears as she placed a kiss on his temple. Inko, what the hell do you think you're doing? Hisashi's voice was a growl, causing Inko to flinch as she let go of Izuku fully, while the boy instinctively backed into the corner and curled up, his knees to his chest as he pressed the heel of his hand to his ears. Nothing is going on, I just had to talk with Izuku. Inko huffed, standing in front of Izuku to hide the sight of the trembling boy, which only drove Hisashi further into his anger. Yeah, of course, you had to talk to him in your robe while it reeks in here? Hisashi growled while Inko rolled her eyes and crossed her arms over her chest. Why must you always assume things from me, Hisashi? I'm your wife, you should . Though as Inko went to continue, Hisashi walked over to her room and slammed the door open, revealing the still half-naked alpha in her bed. Oh, what the foo . Get the F out of my house this instant, Hisashi growled as he let his scent travel throughout the room and the entire house, a sign of clear ownership, and the half-naked alpha scrambled to get his clothes on as he fumbled with his things, though Hisashi stood in front of the doorway as the man changed, hoping that just in case Izuku was looking his young eyes would not be permanently scarred by the sight of the smoker. The alpha ran out of the house quickly, his shoes barely on his feet as Hisashi slammed the door behind him and locked it before going to Inko's room and closing the door. The woman was looking away from her husband, but Hisashi paid her no mind as he shoved past her, causing Inko to snarl as she watched her husband go straight to the curled-up ball in the corner. "Izuku, button flower. It's going to be okay now, sweetheart." Hisashi cooed gently, carefully pulling Izuku's hands away from his ears as he gently coaxed Izuku to look at him while he wiped his tears, only to snarl at the sight of Izuku's busted lip and the small bruise that had already started forming from where Inko had struck him. "Inko, what the F dash?" Hisashi growled as he pulled Izuku onto his feet, opening his arms for Izuku to hide in them. The boy buried his face into his father's chest, hugging the man tightly while Hisashi held him protectively, the alpha looking over his shoulder to his wife as he glared at her. "Look, he was just a work friend and dashed up. I don't give a shit about your cheating. I don't give a shit about whom you bring into your bed. What I care about is the fact you hit our son. I care about the fact that you subjected Izuku to such a sight." Hisashi growled while Izuku coughed out a sob, though Hisashi only pulled Izuku closer to him. "You act like he hasn't seen that before. Besides, I'm your wife. You should care." Inko shouted while Hisashi snarled. "And he's your son. Why in the name of the gods would you hit him?" Hisashi growled as he turned away from Izuku, though he kept the boy behind him as he glared heatedly at his wife. "Oh Hisashi, I'm just getting him used to it." "Izuku, honey, do you really think that your soulmate will ever love you? Or that you'll ever have one?" Inko questioned cruelly while Izuku only clung to his father desperately. "Stop it, Inko. Do you think that you'll be loved by your mate? By your husband?" Inko shouted while Izuku sobbed. "Inko, enough. Look at your father and me. Neither of us got the chance with our soulmates. What makes you think that you'll get the chance?" Inko continued, only for Izuku to run out from behind his father, trying to sprint past his mother and make it to the safety of his bedroom, only for Inko to grab him by his hair and yank him back, causing Izuku to cry out in pain as he looked up at his mother with tears in his eyes. His knees bent uncomfortably as he tried to ease the tug on his hair. "I'm just preparing you, Izuku. Do you think your mate will treat you any differently? That they'll want you as anything other than a personal toy? A weak quirkless omega? You have no dash dot. Inko, enough." Hisashi roared as he charged forward and yanked Inko's hand from Izuku's hair, causing the boy to fall to his knees as he watched his father hold Inko's wrist bruisingly. Inko snarled at her husband while Hisashi growled back at her. "Izuku, to your room. Now." Hisashi commanded while Izuku wasted no time in running to his room, shutting and locking the door behind him as he ran to his bathroom and jumped into the bathtub, closing the curtain and covering his ears as he sobbed, the muffled sounds of his parents' fight echoing around him. And he wished more than anything that the routine would change. Routine. Was Izuku brave enough to break routine? "Hey hun, are you awake?" Hisashi's voice was soft, gentle, and hesitant, just as it always was after a fight. Izuku hesitantly raised his head from where he was curled up on his bed. He hadn't slept, only keeping the music blaring in his ears to drown out his own cries and the sound of his parents' fight that had continued on until midnight. They had fought again. The fight from last week only put everything on edge, and Hisashi and Inko were left fighting almost every night. But last night had been worse. Inko had said something about Izuku. Again. And Hisashi lost it almost instantly. Izuku knew that his father was tired, and that's why he lashed out so quickly, but it still scared him. And he ran to his room where he cried and hid away throughout the entire night, even when the sounds of his parents yelling died out. "I'm awake, Dad." Izuku's voice was hoarse. He felt his throat crying out in pain as he spoke, while his stomach ached in hunger. Dinner had been long forgotten last night. The door to his room slowly opened, Hisashi careful as he stepped inside. Though the second the alpha saw his son's tired eyes, his tear-stained face, and the scratch marks on his arms and legs from where the boy had no doubt been clawing himself to gain a sense of grounding. His heart broke. "Oh, Izuku." Hisashi spoke softly, his heart breaking at the sight. Izuku merely looked up at his father and slowly left his bed, walking forward to his father where Hisashi opened his arms and took Izuku into a protective hug. Izuku sniffled softly as he hugged his father, though regardless, the smoky scent of his father did nothing if not relax him. "Hey Buttonflower, are you excited for today? It's a very special occasion?" Hisashi questioned softly as he stroked his son's hair, only for Izuku to look up at his father questioningly. "It is? But it's only Saturday? It's not a holiday, is it?" Izuku asked curiously, though Hisashi held himself back from shouting in surprise, not wanting to startle his son. So, he kneeled in front of Izuku and gently rubbed his cheek. "It's July 15th, Izuku." Hisashi smiled, hoping the dots would connect, though Izuku only shrugged and looked at his father expectantly, leaving Hisashi slightly shocked and saddened. "Today is your birthday today, Izuku." Hisashi smiled sadly while Izuku was shocked for a moment before looking down at his feet embarrassedly. "Let's do something fun, okay?" Hisashi grinned while Izuku smiled and nodded. "I'll get breakfast ready, go get cleaned up, we both fell asleep in our clothes from yesterday." Hisashi laughed as he gestured to the both of them, Izuku still in his school uniform while Hisashi was still wearing his scrubs. Izuku headed to his bathroom while Hisashi left the boys' room. The Omega cleaned himself up quickly, throwing on a t-shirt and some shorts, once again letting his hair air dry as he walked into the kitchen. Finding his father in a similar state as himself, casual clothes had obviously thrown on quickly, seeing as Izuku noticed his father's shirt was on backward, while his pitch-black hair stuck to his forehead, flattened by the water from his shower. Izuku laughed at his father's hair, the man normally having it styled professionally. Hisashi noticed his son and laughed at Izuku's own hair. The man gently moved Izuku's flattened hair away from his eyes, chuckling at the length of the mop of green locks. "I think you might be due for a haircut, Izuku." Hisashi chuckled while Izuku giggled as he tucked some of his hair behind his ear before grabbing the plates from the cupboard and setting them on the table while Hisashi prepared the miso soup, the mixed rice, and the natto. Hisashi placed the food on the table, Izuku grabbed their drinks and the two sat down at the table and ate in silence. Izuku could tell there was something his father wanted to say. Just the same, Hisashi could tell there was something Izuku wanted to ask. "Izuku, I need to talk with you about something." Hisashi sighed while Izuku's posture straightened as he looked at his father expectantly. "It's about the whole soulmates and mates business," Hisashi explained as he placed his hand on Izuku's shoulder. While the boy only nodded slowly, the topic was still very sore for Izuku. His mother's words horrified him because so far in his life, all except for his father and Kirishima, everyone had proven her correct. "I don't want you to be afraid of your soulmates, Izuku. I don't want you to think the ones that the gods themselves chose for you are evil and plan to harm you the second they see you," Hisashi explained while Izuku nodded slowly, though Hisashi could tell that he had not convinced the boy. "I can't say I know that whoever they are, they'll be a good person, or if they'll even be someone you want to be with romantically. But regardless, Izuku, I don't want you to have that fear. It's not right. You go on in this life, believing that everyone you cross paths with will inevitably harm you, then you'll be forever alone." Hisashi explained while Izuku hummed in thought. How do you know, Dad?" Izuku questioned softly while Hisashi smiled and kissed his son's head. "I know because that's what I did," Hisashi explained while Izuku went wide-eyed as he looked at his father confusedly. "When I was younger, my parents were harsh, they weren't the emotional type. They expected me to be this stone-hearted alpha, but I hope you know that's not who I am. So, I left for America, but I didn't make friends, Izuku. I made enemies. I made people hate me because I was turning into the very thing I never wanted to be. I was turning into my parents." Hisashi explained, remorse clear in his tone, though he smiled when Izuku hugged his arm, trying to comfort his father. Hisashi pressed his hand to Izuku's head, while the boy looked up at him expectantly, clearly wanting him to continue. "Once I realized it, it took me a while to figure out what I should do. But in the end, I decided that it was for the best that I go back home. But I didn't visit my parents. I didn't even tell them that I came back. But once I came home I met your mother. Hisashi continued, though Izuku could see the emotions run through his eyes: regret, sadness, anger, and pain. Was she always like this? Izuku asked softly, though Hisashi could only sigh sadly. No, she actually used to be one of the kindest and gentlest people you'd ever meet. But Izuku, something in her changed. I'll never know what happened, I never know why. But I do know that she loves you. Even if it's in a sick and horrible way. It's there. Hisashi explained while Izuku bit his lip before he spoke. She doesn't love me, Dad, because I'm the reason you two don't love each other anymore. Izuku spoke softly, tears welling in his eyes before Hisashi immediately stood from his seat and kneeled in front of Izuku, cradling the boy's face with a determined expression. Izuku Midoriya, don't you ever, and I mean ever, blame yourself for your mother and I's relationship. It is in no way your fault. Izuku, you were 5 when your mother changed. It was on her own accord, you had no control, you were and still are a child. Hisashi commanded while Izuku broke into sobs as he jumped into his father's arms. Hisashi held him protectively, combing his fingers through the Omega's hair while Izuku clung to his father like a lifeline. I'm sorry, Izuku. I wish it wasn't like this. I'm so sorry. Hisashi apologized as he bit back his own tears. The sounds of Izuku's quiet sobs, along with the boy's trembling, ripped out Hisashi's heart, tearing it to shreds while all he could do was hold his son as he cried. Why don't you just leave her, Dad? I know she hurts you too. Why can't we just leave? Izuku cried while Hisashi bit his lip as hot tears burned his cheeks. He inhaled shakily, trying with all of his might to not cry so openly. But the way Izuku only burrowed further into Hisashi's arms, desperately searching for a place to hide, made the man's resolve crumble completely. I'm sorry, Izuku. I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. Hisashi cried as he fell to his knees, Izuku crumbling with him as they both cried, though somehow closer to each other than before. Later in the day, after Hisashi and Izuku had cleaned themselves up and finished breakfast, Hisashi insisted the two go out and actually have a fun day. What shall we do today? Hisashi lulled playfully while Izuku walked at his side, thinking of anything he had been hoping to do. Only to draw a blank. Mrs. Tori's? Izuku asked while Hisashi laughed openly. Izuku, my dear, it's your birthday, and you're 15th at that. We can do anything you like. This year is important. Hisashi smiled while Izuku smiled back and nodded. So to Mrs. Tori's we go. Izuku cheered while Hisashi laughed as he shook his head fondly and followed the boy to the flower shop. Though the second the two walked inside, they were immediately greeted by Mrs. Tori and her husband Haida. Izuku, my dear. Happy birthday. Mrs. Tori cheered as the woman ran forward and enveloped Izuku in a hug while Haida walked forward and gently patted Izuku's head before turning to Hisashi as the two side-hugged each other in greeting. Happy birthday, little one. Haida spoke gently while Izuku looked up at the tall woman and smiled brightly. Wait, how did you both know we'd come by? Hisashi questioned while Mrs. Tori giggled and Haida shook her head fondly. Oh, Hisashi, there is hardly ever a day where this boy right here doesn't come by. Besides, we would have called you if you guys didn't come by. We wanted to see our boy on his birthday. Especially this one. It's important, you know. Mrs. Tori cheered while Izuku giggled at the beta's dramatics, though Hisashi laughed and nodded. Speaking of the specialness of this day, Izuku, have your soulmate marks appeared yet? Haida questioned while Izuku blanked for a moment before he went to check the parts of him that were visible, causing the three adults to laugh before Hisashi came forward and checked Izuku's sides. Normally, soulmate marks appear on the upper body, but if we don't find them now, they'll show up later, hun, Hisashi stated while Izuku relaxed and nodded. Hold on there a second, Hisashi. Mrs. Tori cheered as she gently pulled the collar of Izuku's shirt back to check the back of his neck and his back, only to discover a large vine mark traveling from Izuku's right shoulder blade to his left. Hisashi moved quickly to inspect the marking, while Izuku tried to look behind him, only for Haida to grab 2 mirrors and place one to reflect Izuku's mark as she put the other one in front of Izuku so he could see the mark. Oh, it's huge. Izuku shouted while Hisashi mumbled as he inspected the markings. Hisashi, why is it so large? Is this normal? Haida questioned while Mrs. Tori held the mirror in front of Izuku's back as she admired the mark. The mark itself was a vine, a basil color, while spirally around it, orange sparks crackled, almost like small explosions, jagged rocks seemed to shield the vine, and finally, in the very middle of the vine, a green button flower sat on the vine, but on the right side of the smaller flower, a large red cardinal flower sat at the button flower side, its stem a darker shade than the button flower, while on the left of the button flower, a tiger lily stood at the button flower's side. While the stems of all three flowers intermingled until they connected with the vine. Though Hisashi noticed the way the jagged rocks seemed to have a hue similar to that of the cardinal flower, while the crackling explosions seemed to be the same color as the tiger lily. And the green button flower was the same forest green as Izuku's hair. And the man chuckled a little at the sight of the button flower, finding the coincidence humorous. Hisashi? Mrs. Tori questioned while Hisashi cleared his throat and stood, Izuku turning at the same time as he looked up at his father hopefully. You have two soulmates, Izuku. Hisashi smiled while Izuku gaped at his father. Though Mrs. Tori and Haida clapped and cheered. Oh, congratulations, Izuku. That's lovely. Twice the love. Just what you deserve, my boy. Mrs. Tori cheered as she hugged Izuku tightly. Though the boy only stared in shock at his father while Hisashi smiled and gently ruffled the boy's hair. Two. You can have two? Izuku shrieked as he flailed his arms wildly, though Hisashi and Haida only laughed while Mrs. Tori patted the Omega's back gently. Yes, Izuku. It's possible, not too common though, but possible. Hisashi explained while Izuku mumbled under his breath. How could you tell Dad? Izuku questioned while Hisashi grabbed his phone and turned Izuku around so he could take a picture of the mark. Once he turned Izuku back around, he zoomed in on the image of the three flowers. You see the flowers, I'm assuming the button flower symbolizes you, and the other two are your soulmates. But of course, your mark is very detailed. Mine isn't like that, but marks can vary. Most times there's one large determining factor on the mark that symbolizes an individual. It can be anything at all, and sometimes the mark will symbolize the individual's quirk as well. Which I'm guessing is what's going on here. Hisashi explained while Izuku nodded along with his father's explanation. And this, Izuku, is what a soulmate mark looks like when your soulmate has passed away. Hisashi spoke sadly as he rolled up the side of his shirt, revealing his ribcage that sported a green flame and a dull gray cloud mark. The flame wrapped around the lifeless cloud, dimming the glow of the fire. Haida and Mrs. Tori gasped at the sight of the mark, though Izuku only stared at it wide-eyed before looking at his father with sympathy. Did it hurt? Izuku questioned while Hisashi sighed and nodded. It did. When a soulmate dies, you can feel them dying, of course. You don't feel the pain they do, but you'll feel your own heart breaking because of it. But it's better now. Whoever they were, they're in a better place now. Hisashi smiled sadly while Izuku nodded gently before hugging his father. I think we're going to head out and find something fun to celebrate. Hisashi grinned and he turned to Mrs. Tori and Haida, the two nodding before Mrs. Tori gasped and ran into the back. Haida chuckled while Hisashi and Izuku looked at each other questioningly. Mrs. Tori then ran out of the back with a flower crown made of blue daisies, honeysuckle, and lupins. She immediately placed it on Izuku's head as she tucked some of his hair out of the way and straightened the crown. Honey, my camera, quick. Mrs. Tori waved her hand rapidly while Haida laughed and grabbed the Beta's Polaroid camera. Mrs. Tori took the camera from her husband before she tilted Izuku's chin up slightly. Smile for me, darling. Mrs. Tori cheered while Izuku laughed as the woman snapped the picture. Mrs. Tori shook the photo as it came out, only to coo at the picture of Izuku with his flower crown, laughing while his eyes were closed, his cheeks were dusted a slight pink. Oh, now this one is a keeper. Mrs. Tori cooed as she showed Hisashi and Haida the picture. The alphas both smiled at the picture before Hisashi took out his phone and took a picture of the one in Mrs. Tori's hand. Most definitely. Hisashi nodded as he admired the copy of the photo he had taken. Izuku, those flowers are petrified, so they won't die or wilt. Haida added while Izuku gently stroked one of the petals of the crown before smiling and running forward to hug the two. Haida and Mrs. Tori both squeezed him in their hugs. Thank you. Izuku smiled while Mrs. Tori kissed his cheek and Haida nodded with a smile. Now you two go have fun. Tell us all about it Monday, darling. Mrs. Tori instructed as the couple walked the two to the door. Thank you. Hisashi nodded as he and Izuku left the shop. They went to the park before they headed to the Hero Museum. And finally, they ended their travels at a small cafe. A plate of taiyaki and mochi ice cream please, Hisashi ordered while Izuku nodded politely to the waitress. Dessert before dinner, Dad? Izuku teased while Hisashi chuckled and pressed his finger to his lips, shushing Izuku while the boy only laughed. Actually, we do need to have the talk, Hisashi sighed while Izuku went wide-eyed as he coughed up his hot chocolate. Dad, please. We had the talk when I got my first PRD when I was 10. You even used the med book? Please, what else is there for me to know? Izuku whined in a hushed whisper, though Hisashi immediately went red in the face at the realization. By the gods, no. Never again. Izuku, I promise you I hated that talk just as much as you. And I do kind of regret using the book, but regardless you know what is needed for your very natural cycles and dash dot. Dad, Izuku groaned as he used his hands to shield his cherry-red face while Hisashi coughed sheepishly. Anyway, that's not what I meant. I was talking about the soulmates and mates talk. Hisashi explained while Izuku sighed dramatically in relief. Okay, continue. Izuku nodded while Hisashi rolled his eyes playfully. As you should know, alphas can't get a mating scar, but instinctively their scent will change slightly, hardly at all noticeable. But it'll tell others they have a mate. Betas, only females can get a mating scar, though it's just the same for male betas as it is for alphas. And finally, omegas can get a mating scar, regardless of the first gender. Now, any questions on that subject? Hisashi questioned while Izuku shook his head. Nope, that's pretty cut and dry. Izuku shrugged while Hisashi nodded. And obviously you get your mark when you turn 15. Hisashi started again as he gestured to his back, referencing Izuku's mark on his back while Izuku nodded along. And of course, you have the right to choose your soulmates as platonic, or perhaps one will be platonic and the other will be romantic, or they'll both be romantic. There's no way to tell until you meet them yourself. But regardless, all three options are 100% okay. Hisashi continued while Izuku sipped his hot chocolate as he listened. And you know what it looks like when a soulmate dies. Hisashi muttered that part, though Izuku still heard and nodded sadly. Can someone be born without a soulmate? Izuku questioned. No, theoretically speaking it's not possible. Though there are tragic circumstances where a person's soulmate has already died before they get their mark. And by such, when that person's mark appears, they will never have any sort of connection with their soulmate. So they'll feel no pain when they realize it. But it is a very sad thing. Hisashi explained while Izuku nodded hesitantly, assuming by the reasoning that his father's soulmate was alive when he got his mark, so he had a connection with them when they had died. What about Mom? Izuku asked softly, though Hisashi only smiled sadly as he looked down and methodically stirred his tea. Your mother was one of those tragic circumstances. So, she never had a relationship with her soulmate. And honestly, I think that she has always been a little resentful for it. Hisashi explained with a sigh while Izuku twirled his mug in between his hands anxiously. Hisashi noticed the behavior and reached over and gently cupped Izuku's cheek. Not just at you, Buttonflower, but at everyone. The whole world. She's hurt in some way, and by that she's angry. And her anger holds no bounds. Hisashi explained while Izuku leaned into his father's touch. Why would she be mad at you? Your mates. Izuku spoke softly, his tone slightly disheartened. But Hisashi only smiled sadly, though Izuku could see the guilt that made his father's eyes glisten with tears. Hisashi drew his hand back and gripped his pants before signing heavily. Buttonflower. Your mother and I, we haven't been mates for a very long time, Hisashi spoke quietly while Izuku gasped. What? Izuku shouted quietly, though Hisashi only nodded. Why? Izuku asked softly, though Hisashi only shook his head. It's nothing you need to worry about, Izuku. I made my decision for a reason. But I can promise you, it was in no way your fault. But you deserve the truth about your mother's and I's relationship. We may be married, but we're not mates. Hisashi explained while Izuku pursed his lips as he nodded hesitantly. But I can tell you a good thing about soulmates and mates. Hisashi smiled while Izuku nodded for his father to continue. You naturally are drawn to wherever your soulmate is. It's one of the reasons why I came back to Japan. But when you first meet your soulmate, you might not always realize it immediately, but you'll want to be close to them, and you'll want some kind of relationship. And at times people can just guess and they'll show whoever that person is their mark and then they figure it out. Hisashi explained while Izuku smiled at the idea, feeling giddy at the idea that he'd be drawn to two people who would want some form of a relationship with him. Two people who wouldn't abandon him. Izuku didn't even care if they wanted a romantic relationship or a platonic one. All he knew was that he was excited to figure out who they were. And then with mates, it's a similar stance. You're of course drawn to them. But when you're mates, you can sense the other person's emotions by their scent, and their scent will become heightened to you in a few different ways. And there are even times when they can help postpone your heat and rut. Hisashi coughed out the last bit, though Izuku only hummed when his father mentioned heats and ruts. But regardless, he smiled at the notion that one day he'd have someone or two someones that would be able to help him, that would actually love him and be able to tell when his anxiety was getting the best of him. What about soulmates that don't have their mark yet? Like, say if one soulmate has their mark and the other doesn't. Izuku questioned while Hisashi hummed in thought. Technically speaking, if they already know each other, or they meet while the other person still doesn't have their mark, they'll still be drawn to each other, but of course, it becomes stronger once the other person gets their mark. Hisashi explained while Izuku nodded. Though the two both turned their heads as the waitress came back with their treats. They both nodded politely to her as she set down the plates and walked away. But, now that we have those talks aside, I have something to give you, Hisashi stated as he quickly ate a mochi ball before reaching into his pocket. Izuku looked at his father confusedly as the man pulled out a small black box and handed it to Izuku. The boy looked at his father questioningly as he opened the box slowly, while Hisashi only smiled and nodded. Though as Izuku opened the box, he gasped softly, and the button flower necklace was on a black chain. The flower was emerald green, though as Izuku touched it gently, he noticed how the back half of the pendant slid away from the front, revealing an inscription on the back. Don't let the tall weeds cast a shadow on the beautiful flowers in your garden. Dad! Izuku smiled as he quickly ran around the table and hugged his father, while Hisashi chuckled and squeezed Izuku in the hug. I take it I made a good choice with that one? Hisashi questioned playfully while Izuku shook his head swiftly in response, tears welling up in his eyes. Thank you. Izuku spoke softly while Hisashi kissed his son's head and gave him one more squeeze before letting him go. Happy birthday, button flower. Hisashi smiled as he took the necklace from Izuku's hand and unclipped the clasp, placing it at a comfortable length before clasping it again around Izuku's neck. The boy smiled as he fiddled with the pendant, sliding the flower back and forth as he admired the inscription. Izuku and Hisashi hugged once more as they sat back down and enjoyed their treats. After they finished their snacks, they ordered katsudon before heading back home. The two chatted idly as they walked, talking about nothing and everything all at once. Izuku played with his flower crown and necklace while Hisashi laughed and smiled as he watched his son. Though as they drew closer to their home, Izuku hugged his father's arm, while Hisashi did nothing more than hug Izuku close to him with his free arm. Already knowing why his son immediately clung to him, there was no need for questions. As the two stepped inside, they both did a quick look around before sighing in relief and walking inside fully. Izuku headed for his room first, gently placing the flower crown on a hook in his closet while he hid his necklace in his bathroom cabinet. He swiftly changed his clothes to more comfortable and lounging types, a simple pair of sweatpants and a tank top. Hisashi had done a similar transition, now in shorts and a t-shirt. Izuku and Hisashi then both headed to the living room, though Hisashi snapped his head around and Izuku flinched at the sound of the front door opening. Inko! Hisashi tried to sound calm as he said his wife's name, though the slight warning in his tone set Inko off quickly. Hisashi, where did you two go today? Inko questioned while Hisashi scowled at the woman, though Izuku only backed away slightly to stay out of his mother's line of sight. We went out for Izuku's birthday. Hisashi bit out, angered at the fact that Inko hadn't even acknowledged what day it was. Or the fact that she had just completely forgotten. Hisashi had no clue which one it was, but both angered him all the same. I figured as much. So, Izuku, did you get your soulmate marks? Inko questioned while Hisashi's scowl only deepened and Izuku hunched in his shoulders to better hide his marks. I did. Izuku muttered, not meeting his mother's gaze. Though Inko only glared. Look at me when I speak to you. And speak clearly. Inko ordered while Izuku reluctantly looked at his mother. Show me your mark, Inko commanded while Izuku looked at his father fearfully. Though Hisashi stepped in front of Izuku and crossed his arms, his scowl was still present. He doesn't have to show you anything, Hisashi growled while Inko snarled at her husband and strode forward, standing toe-to-toe with the alpha as she snapped her fingers and Izuku flinched, catching Hisashi's attention. Izuku, come here, Inko ordered while Izuku slowly stepped past his father to stand in front of his mother. Where is it? The woman questioned while Izuku glanced at his father, who was only continuously glaring at Inko. On my back, Izuku babbled, while Inko gripped his arm and turned him around before pulling down the collar of his shirt, nearly choking him as she inspected the mark. After a moment Hisashi pulled Izuku back to his side while Inko smirked wickedly. The boy was quick to hide behind his father while Hisashi extended his arm to shield Izuku. Two? Oh, isn't that just hilarious? Inko snickered while Izuku blushed embarrassedly. Inko, don't. Hisashi warned while the beta only laughed cruelly. Oh Izuku, you naive little boy, do you think that those two will love you? If anything, this is just a certified sign of your purpose. Nothing more than a dash dot. Inko, shut up. Hisashi growled as he took a step forward toward the woman. What? Hisashi, don't tell me you've been lying to this boy. He's useless. A quirkless Omega. He has no other purpose than to be dashed. I said shut up. Hisashi roared, his elfin voice lacing his command, causing Izuku to crumble to his knees as he covered his ears. Though Inko was only taken back in shock before she snarled at her husband. You can lie all you want, Hisashi, you know the truth. He's useless, his only purpose is to be used by the ones who'll find him enjoyable for a moment before they toss him aside. Inko shouted while Hisashi growled lowly, though neither noticed as Izuku sprinted off to his room, shutting and locking the door behind him as he slid down the wall, rocking himself back and forth to calm himself down. Though nothing could drown out the sounds of his parents' fight. Inko, enough. I will not hesitate to leave. Hisashi growled in warning while Inko laughed wickedly. Leave? Oh no you won't. Because you couldn't stand to part with your dear little boy. Inko mocked while Hisashi balled his fists, holding himself back. Who the hell said I would leave him? He's coming with me, Inko. Hisashi growled while Inko only smirked sinisterly. You know I'm a pretty crier, Hisashi. And the courts will normally believe the mother over the father unless evidence is shown. And you don't have anything on me. And you think I'll just let you leave me? Let you take Izuku away? Inko taunted while Hisashi's face fell as he looked at his wife, horrified. Just let us go, Inko. I'll give you the house, whatever you want. Just let us leave. Hisashi tried to bargain while Inko scowled at the man before her lips spread into a villainous grin. You're trying to leave me? All because I slept around here and there? It doesn't matter anyway, Hisashi. We're not mates anymore. Inko grinned creepily while Hisashi ground his teeth in frustration. And that's the reason we're not mates. I couldn't handle that pain, Inko. Every time you would cheat I could feel my heart breaking. You don't love me or Izuku. So just let us go. Hisashi shouted while Inko snarled at the man. You're not leaving me, Hisashi. Neither is Izuku. But go ahead and try, you'll lose me and your son. And you'll never see us again. Is that what you want? Inko taunted while Hisashi pursed his lips and screwed his eyes shut in frustration before he turned away from the woman, giving Inko her answer. "You've always been so weak, Hisashi." Inko mocked as she walked away from her husband and went to her room, slamming the door behind her while Hisashi ground his teeth and slumped onto the couch, hunching over as he covered his eyes with his hands and tried his best to stifle the angered sobs that shook his body like an earthquake. Though just down the hall, Izuku heard every word. He heard every threat, every taunt, and mocking tone. He heard it all. And he could only sob as he prayed to the gods that he was sure weren't even listening, begging them to at least save his father. And he wished, more than anything, that the routine would change. The routine had to change. Izuku followed the routine as if it was a religion, faithful and without question. Ever since their last fight on his birthday, Hisashi and Inko both had been unnaturally quiet. Hisashi seemed downcast, and Inko just seemed more irritated. But Izuku, he just couldn't forget what he had heard. He couldn't get the heartbreaking sounds of his father's muffled sobs out of his ears. And each day passed in a blur. And Izuku would fall asleep each night and wake up each morning, unable to remember the day he had just lived and the day before. Nothing stood out, nothing broke that trance. Every taunting word thrown out by his classmates who had decided their cruel words will be a part of Izuku's daily routine did nothing to him. He was silent and didn't acknowledge a single word that was said around him, no matter how long and loud they rang like the bells of a church in his head. Every distasteful glance or judgmental sneer that was directed at him did nothing more than alert Izuku that someone was watching him, but not with care or worry. Care for the boy whose gaze matched that of a distant world, faded and glassy, somehow there in every aspect, taking in their world fully, and yet so far away that it was questionable if he would even hear an explosion next to his ear. Or worry for their classmate that was the target of so much cruel treatment that no one stepped in to stop. And every shove or kick that was aimed to force the Omega into the lockers or to the ground was dealt with as nothing more than an accident, the fault of the wind, or a stray rock or twig. And every time one of the assailants would corner him, it would earn nothing more than a hoarse and hesitant response, hardly a whisper, even a whisper. Not a single thing stood out, nothing broke the cycle, so nothing pulled him out. Not his father, his hugs, his loving words. His mother, her harsh criticism, or her yelling at his father. Mrs. Tori, her embraces and tales of her previous adventures as a traveler. Nothing. Then before he knew it, it was October. The slowly chilling weather alerted him, but it wasn't just that, it was the 16th. It was Kirishima's birthday. And for a moment, the trance was broken. But he still needed to get through the hell he called school. Sitting in class waiting for the bell to ring was torture. Izuku could feel his anxiety spiking as if he hadn't had to deal with these things daily for years. But today felt different. Maybe it was because he was excited to see Kirishima, or maybe because this was the first day in a while that he knew he'd remember that he was present long enough to actually process it. Though he was deciding that it could be both, that didn't mean his heart wasn't hammering out of his chest regardless. Finally, the bell rang, and Izuku nearly shot out of his seat until he saw Tsubasa and Hashiga approaching his desk. The boy then sunk into his seat and tried to look anywhere but at them. But it truly is so hard to not look at a train wreck as it happens. There's our favorite little quirkless freak. Haven't said much lately, you want to change that today? Hashiga questioned tauntingly while Izuku only looked at his desk silently. If they already expected him to stay silent, there was no point in actually speaking. Oi, look at us when we talk to you. Don't good Omegas know how to respect their superiors? Tsubasa questioned mockingly, though Izuku didn't acknowledge their taunts. Nor did he acknowledge when Tsubasa grabbed him by the collar and pulled him out of his desk. Izuku kept his gaze on the ground, silent as the two boys sneered. There was no point in pretending that he cared. They could hurt him and he wouldn't feel it. Their taunts were white noise. Nothing about them mattered to Izuku, they were easy to ignore. The F, are you extras doing that's taking so long? Bakugo growled as he stomped back into the classroom while Tsubasa and Hashiga looked over their shoulders at the blonde. Yes, Tsubasa and Hashiga meant nothing to Izuku, they were nothing more than blurred figures in his dysfunctional life. But Bakugo, he meant something, he stood out. And for the life of him, Izuku wished he could just hate the blonde for it. But no matter how hard he tried, he just couldn't. Just trying to teach this beach a lesson, man. Tsubasa gruffed at the other alpha, though Hashiga only took a few steps back, allowing Bakugo to stand next to the bully that still held Izuku by his collar, only sparing the greenette a glance before he turned back to the bully with a glare. "You're wasting your FNG time." Bakugo commanded while Hashiga and Tsubasa both went wide-eyed as they looked at Bakugo questioningly. "Bakugo," he dashed. Though before Tsubasa could continue, Bakugo gripped the bully by his face, squeezing as he scowled menacingly at the shorter alpha. "Did I ask for your FING opinion, you DMN extra?" Bakugo commanded again as he shoved Tsubasa away, the boy grunting as he rubbed his jaw while he and Hashiga left the classroom, leaving Izuku and Bakugo alone, though Izuku still refused to look up from the ground. "FNG nerd." Bakugo growled while Izuku flinched when he pulled Izuku's ear and forced him to look up at the blonde, though Izuku whined at the tug on his ear. "The F is wrong with you?" Bakugo growled while Izuku glared the best he could at the blonde, though he knew was pouting more so than glaring. "I don't know what you mean, Kaken," Izuku stated softly, still not a fan of speaking much, but he knew ignoring the alpha would be a mistake. "So, now you decide to effing speak, huh?" Bakugo growled while Izuku huffed exasperatedly at the blonde. "Don't give me that effing look, you little sheet. You haven't been speaking in class at all for nearly 3 months, not to mention you look like you're off lost in space. What the F is wrong with you?" Bakugo stated as he pulled harder on Izuku's ear, which in turn caused the boy to whine at the tug as he grabbed Bakugo's hand and tried to pull him off. "Stop it, Kaken. And I don't get what you mean, why do you even dash?" Bakugo quickly shut Izuku up by grabbing his face and covering his mouth. "Don't pull that effing bullshit with me, damn it. You effing Deku, you think you can act like a effing idiot without me figuring it out? You better learn it quickly or I'll beat it into your demon's skull." Bakugo shouted as he shoved Izuku to the ground, stepping past the Omega as he stomped out of the classroom. "Kaken, why are you always so confusing?" Izuku sighed as he rubbed his face, thankful that there weren't any bruises on his face. Izuku then quickly packed up the rest of his things and ran out of the classroom, running to his locker and struggling to carry a separate gym bag he brought as he left the school out the back way, heading to the park as fast as he could. "Kirishima!" Izuku called as he ran forward to their tree where the Ravenet was already seated. "Hey, Izuku." Kirishima smiled, though there was something different about Kirishima. Izuku couldn't recall the day before to look back on. But he just knew something was different, something in the routine was changed. "How has your birthday been?" Izuku questioned as he sat next to his friend, searching everything he could see to find out what was changed, what was causing such a feeling inside of Izuku's chest. "It's been boring but cool at the same time." "How was your day, Mido?" Kirishima questioned, though Izuku missed the way Kirishima's eyes traveled over him, as if inspecting something, but even Kirishima wasn't sure what it was he searched for. Izuku tried to recall his day, one memory, anything good at all, but all he remembered was leaving the flower shop and his unsavory time at school. He didn't even remember greeting his father that morning. "Oh, nothing big happened, boring too. But I got you something actually." Izuku was quick to change the subject as he pulled the separate gym bag in front of him, opening it slightly to reveal the various types of training equipment. "Holy shit! Dude!" Kirishima shouted as Izuku handed him the bag, only for the alpha to notice the weight of the bag. He looked inside and noticed decent-sized dumbbells and other equipment meant for endurance training. "Is it weird? I know you're not the biggest materialistic person and I didn't know what else to get you. Are weights and stuff a bad gift? I'm not trying to say you need to work out or anything. You're already super strong and all. But you were talking about your endurance training the other day and I dashed on." Izuku rambled anxiously, only to silence himself when Kirishima grabbed his face and gently squeezed his cheeks together. "Dude, they're awesome. Thank you, and I know you weren't being second-handed with this. I wanted stuff like this for my birthday." Kirishima laughed as he let go of Izuku's face while the boy nodded with a smile. "I'm glad. I was worried that I had gotten the wrong kind, or that they'd be too light. I tried to remember what you said your limit was, sorry." Izuku chuckled sheepishly while Kirishima shook his head fondly and reached into the black gym bag and pulled out the various pieces of equipment. Though he was surprised to feel the actual weight of the dumbbells Izuku had bought, they were just a tad bit over his limit. Though his limit so far was 175 IBS, seeing as he had just started his physical training a couple of months ago. Holy shit, dude, were you carrying these around all day? Kirishima questioned as he set the weights back in the back, along with the other few things in the gym bag. I had them in my locker most of the day, but leaving home for school and then to here I carried them. I don't know how you do your workouts with those things, my shoulders were killing me. Izuku laughed while Kirishima shook his head with a chuckle. That's because I use them correctly. And you're used to more cardio, not weight training. Kirishima laughed while Izuku huffed. And I'll stick with my cardio. At least I don't feel like my shoulders will fall off afterward. Izuku teased while Kirishima sputtered. That's because you were carrying around at least 350 pounds all day. Dude, you should have had me come pick them up. Kirishima laughed while Izuku stuck his tongue out at his friend. Kirishima chuckled before he dramatically fell into Izuku's lap, pinning the boy's legs to the ground while the greenette struggled for a moment before sighing heavily as he looked down at the ravenet. I will slap you with my notebook, Izuku warned while Kirishima laughed. Come on Mito, you wouldn't. You love him. Kirishima's response was muffled as Izuku slapped his notebook onto the alpha's face and continued to push the notebook onto his face, trying to suffocate the boy, though the sound of Kirishima's muffled laughter told him he wasn't successful. Izuku huffed as he relented on his shoving while Kirishima gently pushed the notebook away and sat up, freeing Izuku's legs. Izuku blew a raspberry at the boy and curled his legs to his chest while Kirishima laughed. Though when the ravenet checked the time, he inhaled deeply when he realized it was time for the both of them to go home. Izuku soon realized this as well when he checked his phone. I guess we better head home, huh? Izuku questioned, though Kirishima saw the hesitation in his smile. Actually, how about you have a sleepover at my house? I mean, I doubt my parents would mind at all. Kirishima offered, though he did his best to hide the dread that suddenly overcame him at the idea of Izuku going home. Izuku looked surprised for a moment before he sighed heavily and did his best to smile. Thanks, Kiri, but I don't think my parents would be okay with it. But I'll see you tomorrow. Izuku smiled, though the boy yelped when Kirishima grabbed him by his backpack and yanked him back, pulling him into a hug. Izuku paused for a moment before he hugged Kirishima. I'll see you tomorrow, Kiri, Izuku stated as he let go of the ravenet and waved to him as he left. The routine went on as normal. Izuku's vision blurred through every word spoken between him and Mrs. Tori, and blurred until he stepped foot in his house, where the scent of alcohol made the entire home reek. Izuku didn't bother to see what caused the stench, he already knew. And he would much rather prefer not to meet face to face with the culprit. So, he went to his room, closing and locking the door behind him as he went to his bathroom and turned on his shower, waiting for the water to heat up. But as he peeled off his clothes, he noticed the bruises that were hidden under his uniform. What a strange sensation, it was as if he was seeing his body for the first time, as though he didn't look into the mirror every morning. How long had his mind been away from him? Had he truly been so close and yet so far away from the reality that his body acted on the instinct of the routine? Had it truly taken his friend's birthday to finally bring him back? Had anyone noticed? Did he worry his father? Did his mother even care? Did Kirishima know? Had they tried to bring him back? Or was he truly alone? Izuku didn't ponder on his muttered questions any further. He peeled off the rest of his garments and stepped into his shower, sighing contently at the feeling of warm water washing away his thoughts, even though he knew they would return the moment he left the oasis. He reveled in the foreign sensation of the water. He knew that he had taken plenty of showers before this. But he enjoyed this one. He felt energy he hadn't had in months return to him, the motivation to stay in reality for however long he could. The motivation to do everything he could to reach his goals, no matter how far away they seemed. But just as expected, the moment he left the water, the moment his eyes opened, the dull ache of the bruises returned, as did his fatigue. Though he continued to ignore it. Why had that always been the easiest for him? To ignore and hide from his pain? Was he truly that much of a coward? Izuku stared at his floor blankly as he moved around his room, cleaning it up to the best he could, his towel still wrapped snugly around his waist. Though at the sound of his phone going off, Izuku quickly searched through the pile of laundry he had set on his bed to remind himself to wash, searching for his phone underneath the pile. Once finding it, he saw it was his father calling him. "Hey Dad." "Hey hun, work has been crazy today, I won't be home until a little later tonight. If you want, go ahead and call something in for yourself, the emergency card is in my sock drawer." "Okay, Dad, I will." "All right, love you Buttonflower." "Love you Dad." Izuku hung up the phone with a sigh. He placed his phone back on his bed and went back to cleaning. Once he put a tank top and shorts on, he left his room hesitantly, heading to the laundry room. Once he had everything thrown in the washing machine, he went to his father's room, going straight to his sock drawer for the emergency card that he always left for Izuku in case he ever needed to get something. The boy grabbed the card and left his father's room, closing the door behind him as he went to the front door, putting his shoes on quickly so he could escape the stench of alcohol. Izuku walked down the street silently, his music playing in his ears, drowning out the sounds around him. No one paid him any mind, he was a ghost to the strangers around him, but that's what he wanted. It was easier to be unseen than to be seen as a target. After Izuku had gone to a small restaurant and bought 3 rice bowls, one for himself and one for each of his parents, he headed back home. Though he walked slowly, he scanned everything around him as he walked. He watched as couples walked hand in hand, he watched as small children played with each other in the small parks, and he watched a lower-level pro heroes patrol. But it felt like he was watching a movie. It didn't feel like he was real, it felt like he was watching himself from a stranger's perspective. But there wasn't anything noteworthy to see in a ghost. Returning home was tiresome by just waking through the door. The smell of alcohol made him cringe, and he went to the kitchen and lit a few candles while opening the windows, hoping the stench would leave and help avoid yet another fight between his parents. Though when Izuku heard a door open and close, he flinched, knowing that it wasn't his father who had finally returned home. "Izuku." Inko slurred while Izuku slowly turned to face his mother, only to see how the woman's steps were sloppy and her gaze was foggy. "How are you feeling, Mom?" Izuku questioned gently as Inko came up next to the boy, leaning on the counter for support while Izuku slowly stepped away and grabbed a water bottle from the fridge and handed it to the beta. Inko hummed as she opened the bottle and gulped down the water. She sighed heavily as she rubbed her temple before she stared at Izuku's hand questioningly, the boy holding out a few migraine pills. Inko took the pills and swallowed them with some water before turning back to Izuku, who placed the rice bowl he had bought for her next to her on the counter. The woman slurred out an unintelligible response as she began to eat while Izuku pulled out his own rice bowl and ate alongside her. The two stayed in complete silence. Though as the two finished, Izuku threw away the styrofoam bowls and placed his father's food in the fridge, Inko slowly scanned Izuku over, only to flinch at the sight of the bruises that littered his shoulders and arms, his large soulmate mark ignored completely. "Izuku." Inko's words were still slurred slightly, but her tone was noticeably stern, and Izuku flinched and cowered under his mother's gaze as she walked forward to the boy. Izuku screwed his eyes shut as Inko reached out for the omega, only for Izuku to gasp softly when a gentle hand cradled his face while the other gently glided over the bruises. "What happened?" Inko's question was slurred, but Izuku heard the concern in her voice, and he held back his tears at the genuine worry in this mother's tone. "It was an accident at school, someone pushed me into the lockers, but they didn't mean to, it was an accident, and they apologized afterward." The lie fell out of Izuku's mouth before he could even think, the lie dancing on his tongue in a well-versed dance. Inko's expression went back to its sluggish drunken state, and a small sluggish smile spread her lips before she leaned forward and placed a sloppy kiss on Izuku's cheek. "That's good. Was school good? You have friends, don't you?" Inko slurred as she kept her forehead pressed to Izuku's cheek, the woman holding her son's arm for support while Izuku wrapped an arm around her shoulders to steady her. "School's good, Mama, and I have friends, don't worry." Yet another well-versed lie, told so easily as if it was the truth. "But, my sweet little boy, are you and Katsuki still friends? You two were friends when you were little. Mitsuki is my friend, did you know? That's how you two met." Inko slurred while Izuku bit the inside of his cheek at the mention of the blonde. We're still friends, and I remember Mitsuki, you told me when I was little that you two have been friends for a long time. And I remember when you introduced Katsuki and me. Izuku smiled slightly at the distant memory of when Inko had brought him to the park one day, introducing him to Mitsuki, who was already there with her own son. Mitsuki was kind to Izuku, doting on him and proclaiming he was the most darling Omega she had ever seen. Mitsuki then stood and stepped away from where she had been kneeling next to Izuku, shouting loudly for her son to come to her. Izuku instinctively cowered behind his mother when Mitsuki roared, the older alpha having to use a stern tone to get her son's attention. A blonde boy with spiky hair identical to Mitsuki's came running over, the young boy already having a stern glare similar to the one Mitsuki wore until she led Katsuki to stand in front of her as she turned back to Inko and Izuku. The woman smiled as she introduced Katsuki. Izuku smiled at the boy and waved happily, but the young Bakugo only huffed at the greenette as he looked back up to his sire. Mitsuki instructed Katsuki to go play with Izuku while she and Inko talked. Izuku yelped when the blonde yanked him out from behind his mother and dragged him away from the adults, ignoring Izuku's struggle as he tried to keep up with the young alpha. The rest of the memory was blurred to Izuku, but he remembered following Katsuki, intrigued by the boy's determination and courage. And he remembered that the young Bakugo had a habit of dragging Izuku along with him wherever he went until Izuku no longer needed to be dragged. He followed the blonde faithfully, inspired by the determination to become a hero, so much so that he wanted to be able to be one by his side. Izuku thought back on the memories almost sadly, wishing for the days when he was oblivious, when he didn't know of his parents' true relationship, and when his oldest friend didn't hate him. Izuku flinched when a hand wiped at his cheek, only then realizing he was crying, and that it was his mother wiping away his tears. Izuku, what's wrong, honey? Inko's question was slurred and full of worry. I'm okay, Mama. I was just happy to remember those good times is all. Izuku laughed, quickly wiping away the rest of his tears while Inko hummed in response. I love you, Izuku. Inko slurred while Izuku's eyes widened in shock before he pursed his lips and led his mother back to her room, helping her into her bed. You need to sleep, Mom. You'll have a headache in the morning if you don't. Izuku spoke softly as he placed Inko's water bottle on her nightstand, the woman already laying in bed. Though the boy looked up at the woman when she placed a gentle hand on his cheek. I love you, Izuku. I forget to say it, don't I? I'll say it more. Inko's words were hardly intelligible, every word slurred with fatigue and drunkenness. But Izuku understood her perfectly, and he fought every part of himself to hold back a sob. I love you too, Mom. Sweet dreams. Izuku spoke softly, though as he went to leave, Inko sat up and pulled him down to kiss his forehead, smiling sluggishly as she laid back down. Sleep overcame her almost immediately while Izuku stared at his mother's sleeping form in shock while tears glistened in his eyes. Quickly, Izuku left the woman's room and closed the door behind him, only for the greenette to slide down the wall as he curled up on himself, biting back his sobs with all of his might before he finally stood once again and went straight to his room. Izuku closed his door behind him before he collapsed to the ground, laying on his back as he stared up at the ceiling, tears running down the sides of his face as he stared up at the wall blankly. Maybe the routine didn't need to change. It needed to break. The routine couldn't change. But it could be broken. Now Izuku just needed to find out how. And he needed to know if the true difference when it finally broke, was he strong enough to do it? Or was it truly weakness? Izuku slowly opened his eyes, the beeping of his alarm annoying him enough to encourage him to move. The boy slowly rose from his bed, the corners of his eyes feeling irritated and dry from the night prior. He wondered why he wasn't used to it by now. It was just another fight. He had heard a vase break, and he knew that his father and mother retreated to their separate rooms as always. But it still caused him such a headache. Izuku rose slowly, stretching his legs and spine satisfying, groaning in contempt once his back released the strings of pops from his spine. The boy headed to the bathroom, stripping once he had turned on his shower. The water revived him once he stepped foot in the shower, quickly washing his body, hair, and face. Izuku was quick to dry off and get dressed, grabbing his notebook and backpack as he headed out of his room, only to notice the plate of pancakes that sat on the counter with saran wrap covering it. Izuku set his backpack down, grabbing the note that his father had left with the breakfast. Sorry Buttonflower, work is beyond busy right now, love you much. Have a good day, eat your breakfast, and I'll see you after school. Love Dad. Izuku sighed as he tucked the note into his pocket, not having the heart to throw away anything his father wrote for him. But at the sight of the pancakes, Izuku's stomach churned. His father was an excellent cook. Never once had Izuku dared not eat any one of his father's culinary creations. But unfortunately, his appetite was near non-existent in the weeks that had passed recently. Alone, Izuku struggled to eat more than just a quick snack, but in front of his father, Izuku could eat whatever was set in front of him. But those times had been occurring less and less. His parents' fighting interrupted meals. At times it was his father's work that was the culprit, and when the times came that Izuku was left with an intoxicated Inko, the woman's sweet words that were repeated would do nothing more than steal any semblance of an appetite Izuku had, along with the sleep that would never visit him as his mind ran like a bullet train, trying desperately to make sense of his mother's intoxicated confessions of love to her son. Izuku groaned quietly as he grabbed the plate of pancakes. He knew that he did need to eat breakfast. It wasn't healthy to skip meals. He knew this. He studied every medical book his father could give, and he knew every piece of advice that doctors would normally give. He knew the rules. But following them was becoming increasingly harder. So, Izuku went to his mother's room. The woman was still passed out in bed. The boy silently stepped into her room, setting the pancakes on her dresser before swiftly leaving her space and closing the door behind him. Izuku grabbed his backpack and notebook, along with a decent snack that had become his regular midday meal. The boy walked down the street lost in his own mind as he flipped through his hero analysis notebook, but at the sound of a large crash and people cheering and screaming, he averted his path only to see a large villain fighting Kamui Woods, the pro-hero. He had broken a part of the routine. Get away! The villain roared as Kamui Woods avoided a frontal attack from the villain. Turning into a monster? What a crazy quirk! What did he do? Tried to steal a purse and started rampaging when he was cornered. Two civilians spoke to each other as Izuku came up beside them, watching the fight closely so he could see who was fighting the villain. Who's fighting him? Izuku questioned while the two men who were conversing stepped aside slightly to allow Izuku to stand at their sides. The man that was in the business suit gently placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder and pointed towards the villain's shoulder, where Kamui Woods stood on a building. It's Kamui Woods. The other man shouted as he watched the fight, the business suit man nodding as he let go of Izuku's shoulder and watched the fight as well. Izuku gasped excitedly as he opened his notebook to the page where he already had an analysis for the pro-hero. Illegal use of abilities during rush hour as well as attempted robbery and assault? You're pure evil, Kamui Woods stated to the villain, and the monster only roared in return. Your punishment. Kamui Woods started as his right arm began to twist and tangle to that of tree roots. Take him down, tree man. A civilian shouted while others around him cheered. Here it comes, his preemptive ending. Izuku noted, watching the fight diligently while he took notes. Lacquered chain prison. Kamui Woods roared as he attacked the villain, only for a giant woman to come from behind the pro-hero and kick the villain in the face, knocking him out within an instant. Canyon cannon. Any lady shouted as she landed the kick, landing over the villain holding a destroyed sign in her gigantic hand. Today's my debut. Pleased to meet you all. You can call me MD Lady. The female pro-hero announced while many people with cameras began to snap pictures of her as the crowd all cheered. Gigantification, huh? It's a common and quite powerful quirk, but could the threat of public property destruction limit its use? Well, depends on whether or not she can manipulate her size at will. Izuku muttered to himself as he flipped to a new page and began taking notes on the newly debuted pro-hero. Taking notes? I guess you want to be a hero yourself? Good luck, kid. The business suit man next to Izuku cheered while Izuku turned to the man and smiled. Thank you. I'll try. Izuku grinned as he headed off to school. At school, it was the same as any other day, either ignored or laughed at behind his back. But as always, Izuku paid it no mind. Ever since the fight between MP Lady, Kamui Woods, and the villain. Where the kind businessman had encouraged him, Izuku felt a tad bit more confident. You guys are all third years now. It's time to start thinking seriously about your futures. Mr. Ogami shouted as he pulled out a sheet from his desk. I would hand out these future career forms, but I assume all want to be heroes. The man slammed the paper on the desk while the entire class roared in agreement, their quirks activating while Izuku shrunk in his desk a bit. Yes, you all have wonderful quirks. But you know that it's against the rules to use them in school. Mr. Ogami scolded while the class all settled down. Sensei, don't lump me in with these losers. As if I had anything like their crappy quirks. Bakugo smirked pridefully while a few shouts of disagreement could be heard from the other students of the class. Get over yourself, Katsuki. Tsubasa shouted while Bakugo turned his head to the other alpha with a sinister grin. Shut up. Extras should act like extras. Bakugo growled back, laughing as the rest of the shouts of disagreement died out. Ah, Bakugo, you of course must be aiming for high school. Mr. Ogami chimed in while mutters broke out again. That national school? The cutoff score this year is 79%, right? I hear they barely accept anyone. Ah, the stupid chattering of extras. I aced the mock exam. I'm the only one on here with the stuff for U.A. Bakugo declared as he stood from his desk, stomping his foot on the ground to capture his classmates' attention. I'll even surpass All Might and become the best hero out there. Not to mention, I'll be one of the richest people in the world. Bakugo declared as small sparks emitted from his palms. You're also going for U.A., aren't you, Midoriya? Mr. Ogami chimed in, ignoring Bakugo's declaration while Izuku shrunk further into his seat, covering his head with his arms as he looked anywhere but at the blonde who sat in front of him. Everyone in the class turned to look at Izuku before they burst out laughing. Huh? Midoriya? No way. Good grades alone can't get you into the hero program. A few students taunted while Izuku looked down at his feet, trying to find his voice. That's not necessarily true. Sure, there's no precedent, but... Izuku spoke up, though he continued to look at his desk. Come on, Deku. Bakugo roared as he slammed his hand on Izuku's desk, an explosion causing Izuku to fall back and out of his chair with a yelp. Forget the crappy quirks. You're completely quirkless, Deku. You'll FNG die in the entrance exams. And you think you should even dare try that sheet? Bakugo growled while Izuku shrieked and quickly scurried away from the blonde, standing shakily to give himself at least a bit of an advantage. Not trying to compete with you. Not at all. It's just a dream. Besides, they have other good courses. But I could be a doctor. So, there's no harm in trying. Izuku defended himself, his voice quiet as he avoided the gaze of the blonde alpha. Though the rest of the class broke out into laughter at Izuku's defense. You can't do anything to be a hero. A doctor. Geez, you'll be fired from any program that even thinks of letting you in. You'll find a way to kill the training dummy. The few that chimed in only broke out more laughter from the class while Izuku hunched his shoulders and tried to make himself appear smaller, regretting not staying silent. Thankfully, Mr. Ogami settled everyone back down as they all got back in their seats and continued with the lesson. After the class was over, Izuku checked his phone, only to find that the incident from that morning was all over the news. Izuku went to grab his notebook to put in his backpack, planning to stick to the rest of his routine and meet up with Kirishima at the park. Though before he could grab it, Bakugo grabbed his notebook and glared down at the greenette while Izuku yelped, startled. We're not done here, Deku, Bakugo growled while Izuku sighed and stood from his seat. Give it back, Kaken. Izuku pleaded with the blonde while Hashiga and Tsubasa came from behind the alpha, snickering at the scene before them. Though before Izuku could react, Bakugo slammed his hands together, the book in between both, creating an explosion that singed the notebook while Izuku shouted in surprise. Bakugo then threw the book out the window, and Tsubasa and Hashiga blocked Izuku's path before the boy could grab it. The best heroes out there, well, they showed signs of greatness even as students. I'll be the first and only hero from this crappy public middle school. The first to win the honor of becoming a student at U.A. High. Guess I'm just a perfectionist. Bakugo smirked as he grabbed Izuku's shoulder, causing the boy to flinch, feeling the heat from Bakugo's quirk through his clothes. Though Izuku noted that the blonde said nothing about him being a doctor, unlike everyone else in the class. In other words, "Don't you dare get into the hero course, nerd," Bakugo commanded, while Izuku once again noted the lack of mentioning his actual entry into UA. Just the preference of him not entering the hero course. Though regardless, Izuku stayed silent. He looked away from the three boys as they walked away, heading out the door. "Kaken, why are you so confusing?" Izuku thought to himself as he held himself as still as possible, hoping to hide the way his entire form trembled with slight fear. "Geez, typical, come on, say something," Hashiga taunted, though Izuku kept his back turned to the boys. He can't say anything. He's still so delusional and lame. Even as a third year, he still can't face reality. Tsubasa snickered while Hashiga laughed cruelly. Honestly, he should just put himself out of his misery. Hashiga snickered, nudging Bakugo's shoulder while Tsubasa laughed openly. Bakugo clicked his tongue as he stood in the doorway, the other two flanking him. He wants to be a hero so bad, get himself killed? Just pray that you'll have a quirk in the next life and take a swan dive off the roof of the building. Bakugo growled. And with that he left. Tsubasa and Hashiga followed after him, laughing. Leaving Izuku alone as the boy trembled, staring at the floor wide-eyed. Feeling as though his very soul had been ripped out and crushed right in front of him. Izuku stood still, silent, expression still morphed into nothing but that horror and heartbroken look. The boy slowly grabbed his backpack, his arms shaking as he grabbed the bag, his legs felt numb, and he felt like he would be sick. Bakugo had said plenty of mean things to him in their lifetime. The alpha had always torn through his walls as if they were made of nothing but grass. And Izuku could never find it in himself to hate him for it, to hate him for the pain he caused. But this was a new pain, this was a new feeling. And yet, hatred was the last thing he felt. He felt heartbroken. He felt betrayed. Izuku walked out to the backside of the school, scanning the ground for his notebook, only to find it in the koi pond. Izuku reached into the pond and grabbed his notebook, his fingers barely keeping a grip on the singed and drenched book. "Why, Kaken? I don't understand. You don't just say those things. But why does it hurt this much? What if I actually did it? What then?" Izuku spoke to himself, hugging his notebook to his chest as he willed away the tears, ignoring how his shirt was soaked by the book. Izuku started to walk his normal route to the park, knowing that Kirishima would be there waiting for him. But he just couldn't do it. He couldn't face his friend, not when he felt like his heart had just been torn out of his chest and ripped to pieces in front of him. He knew that if he saw Kirishima angry, or worse, unsympathetic to the situation, he would break completely. Despite the improbability of either of those situations, he still couldn't do it. So, he took a different route home. He had broken another part of the routine. Izuku walked silently down the empty ditch road, walking through the dimly lit tunnel. "It's okay, everything will be okay. I can do this. I just have to keep my head up." Izuku tried to encourage himself. A medium-sized body to hide in. A dark voice rasped behind Izuku. The boy turned quickly only to see a sludge monster before it attacked him, engulfing him before he could even react. Izuku screamed, though it was muffled as the villain's sludge began to choke him. "Quirkless? And an Omega? I couldn't have asked for a better disguise." The villain rasped in his ear while Izuku continued to scream, despite his voice begging muffled, and every kick and punch he threw was completely useless. "Don't worry, I'm just hijacking your body. Calm down. It'll only hurt for about 45 seconds and then it'll be over." The villain reassured while Izuku only continued to fight. "I'm saved, you're a real hero. I never thought he'd show up in this town." The villain drawled while Izuku began to claw at the sludge that continued to suffocate him. "Yeah, that won't work on me, I'm Fluid Kid." The villain laughed while Izuku's tears began to roll down his face. "I can't breathe. I'm dying. No, I don't want to die like this. I want to be able to say goodbye. Please someone help me, I'm dying." Izuku thought to himself as his vision slowly began to black out, the burning in his lungs finally dying into a dim burning ember. Fear not. I am here. A voice boomed from behind Izuku, though the boy couldn't focus on it. All he could feel was the way his heart began to slow and his lungs stopped attempting to find any air to breathe. Texas, smash! All Might roared as he punched the villain, sending him flying as Izuku was released from his hold, falling to the ground as All Might collected the villain. Izuku groaned as he felt his cheek be repeatedly slapped gently, only to open his eyes and yelp in surprise, scurrying back against the tunnel wall, staring up at the large figure of All Might. Thank goodness, thought we might have lost you there. Sorry for getting you caught up in this, young one. But fear not, I have contained the villain. All Might reassured as he showed Izuku the bottle he had detained the villain in. Izuku stared in awe at the pro-hero while the man turned away. Izuku scrambled to get up, searching for his notebook so he could ask for an autograph, only to find that All Might had already signed it. Now I need to take this villain to the police. You can catch me again on TV. All Might declared as he crouched to the ground, preparing to take off. Hold on. I still need to ask you. Izuku thought as he began to walk forward, reaching out for the number 1 pro-hero. Until next time. Thanks for your support. All Might shouted as he took off. Though when the man felt the extra weight, he found Izuku clinging to his shirt for dear life, staring down at the ground horrified. Hey now. Release me. Such enthusiasm is a bit much, isn't it? All Might shouted over the winds that filled both of their ears. If I let go now, I die. Izuku screamed, clutching the pro-hero's shirt for dear life. True enough. All Might agreed as he coughed, and a drop of blood fell past his lips. DMN. All Might muttered as he landed on the rooftop of one of the skyscrapers. Oh dear gods. Izuku breathed, clutching his shirt, trying to get his heart to restart. Of all of the... All Might growled, his back turned to Izuku. Hopefully the people downstairs will help us get down. But I have no time though. Truly. All Might declared while Isaac took a shaky breath and looked up at the Alpha. Wait, Izuku began, though every question he wanted to ask, every word he wanted to say, it all caught in his throat, silencing him. No, I will not wait. All Might declared, his back still turned to Izuku. Finally, Izuku found his voice. Even without a quirk. Can I still be a hero? Can I still help people? Izuku questioned, his head bowed respectfully to the pro-hero. A quirk dashed at. All Might began, only to begin coughing as he doubled over, blood seeping from his mouth. Izuku heard the coughing fit and slowly raised his head, only to see the blood that stained the Alpha's hand. All Might, are you okay? Izuku questioned as he ran forward to the pro, disregarding every anxious thought that screamed at him to keep a respectable distance from the pro. Do you have an internal laceration? Is it a medical issue? Have you been sick for a long time? And if so, how long have you been coughing? Do you have any dental issues such as sores? Izuku rambled his questions as he dropped his backpack and rummaged through it, pulling out his first aid kit. He grabbed the gauze and pulled All Might's hand away from his mouth, once again disregarding how the pro tried to wave him off. No, young man, I don't dash dot. All Might began as he tried to gently nudge Izuku away, though the boy was persistent as he gently held the gauze to the corner of All Might's mouth. It might be something you don't know of. You should go to a doctor. This amount of blood isn't normal, nor is the coloration. Izuku continued, though within an instant and a strange puff of smoke, the once large figure of All Might was replaced with a lanky, tall, and skeletal-looking man. What? Izuku screamed, jumping back at the sight of the shriveled form of All Might. What the heck? Are you an imposter? Izuku shouted while All Might coughed once again as he sat down against the railing of the tower. I am All Might, the pro-hero stated while Izuku tried to wrap his head around what he was seeing. You know how some guys like to swagger with their abs out at the pool? It's like that. All Might tried to explain while Izuku only continued to stare at the man in shock. There's no way. Izuku muttered to himself as rubbed his eyes, only to open them and see the same sight before him. Since you've already seen my true form, I might as well. But don't go posting about this on the internet. All Might ordered while Izuku nodded shakily. All Might lifted his shirt, revealing the grotesque scar that covered the entirety of the left side of his torso. Izuku shrieked and covered his mouth, shocked at the injury. This is a wound a villain gave me 5 years ago. My respiratory system is in shambles and my stomach was totally scooped out. I've wasted away from constant surgeries and their complications. And I've been reduced to about 3 hours of heroics a day. All Might explained while Izuku inspected the wound from the distance he had created, not dating to breach any closer to the hero. 5 years ago? Was it your fight with Venom Chainsaw? Izuku questioned while All Might looked surprised for a moment before he held up his fist. I wouldn't let a thug like him take me down. And you know your stuff. All Might stated while Izuku shifted nervously where he stood. The symbol of peace, who always rescues others with a smile. Must never succumb to the forces of evil. All Might declared while Izuku nodded hesitantly. A pro-hero is always laying his or her life on the line to protect others. So that's why I must say you can't become a hero without a quirk, not to mention I can tell you're an Omega. You're already at a disadvantage. All Might stated while Izuku went wide-eyed at the statement. All Might stood and walked past Izuku, heading out the door while Izuku stood still, his face trained towards the ground while he tensed his entire body to hide his trembling. With that being said, you need to see the reality for what it is. All Might ordered as he left, leaving Izuku alone on the rooftop. Once Izuku heard the door to the roof close, he crumbled. He fell to his knees and clutched the necklace he wore daily. The gift from his father. Izuku cried as he clutched the necklace, praying to the gods for the reassurance his father had always given him. Praying that if he just closed his eyes, he would wake up in a home where his father didn't work so much just to provide for him and his mother, that he would wake up in a home where his mother correctly showed her love, in a world where others' words didn't hurt him in such ways. And in a world that he could imagine himself living in. Izuku coughed, struggling to breathe through his sobs. But what have I done wrong? I can't do this. I'm tired. Izuku cried. To who? He had no clue. He didn't know if he was crying to the gods or himself. Begging the beings that he had no clue if they were even there. If they were even listening to help him. Or to himself. To finally do what needed to be done. Izuku sat in silence, throat sore from the attack he had just endured and from his crying. He brought his hand to his face, wiping his tears with his sleeve. The boy stood slowly, his expression bleak and tired as he stared out over the railing of the skyscraper. If you were to look into his eyes, you would see nothing. No life, no emotions, no will. Nothing. He was in the clouds. What was it you said, Kaken? Take a swan dive. Izuku giggled to himself, stepping forward to the railing. His next movements were methodical and quick. He stood on the edge of the building, staring down at the ant-sized cars and people that carried on with their lives, unknowing of the boy who stood on the line between life and death. Though as Izuku felt the breeze blow past him, he smiled as he looked up at the clouds. He had always wondered what it was like to fly. Did falling have the same feeling? But before the boy could take the final step, a mist-like hand was placed on his shoulder, shocking him out of his trance. Immediately, Izuku scrambled back over the railing, panting as he fell to his knees and hugged himself, horrified and angry at himself for what he had almost done. But then he saw the dress shoes that stood before him. They were connected to a tall mist-like man. The mist had a purple coloration while the man's eyes were a bright yellow, and he held no shape or form except for his torso and lower body. I'm sorry to have startled you, but I was hoping I could ask you a few questions. The man spoke like an echo. Izuku only looked up at him shocked for a moment before he nodded. The mist man then kneeled to Izuku as he sat on his knees. You were just with All Might, yes? I had thought I saw him land up here with you? The mist man questioned while Izuku looked down for a moment. He was angry. He could tell that. He was angry at All Might. How could anyone call themselves a pro-hero and say such things to a child? And then leave them alone on a skyscraper after having just been nearly killed by a villain? But he also remembered what he had witnessed and how All Might had commanded him to tell no one. A part of him wanted to spread the word, but the other part of himself knew that would do nothing, it would accomplish nothing. And he would hate himself for it afterward. I was just with him, he saved me from a villain, Izuku stated as he looked back up at the mist man. The formally dressed man only hummed in response. I see, do you know where he is headed? The man asked while Izuku thought to himself for a moment before nodding. I think to the police station. He had to turn in the villain. The mist man only nodded as he stood, though Izuku looked up at the stranger in shock as the man gently grabbed his arm and led him to stand. Thank you for your help. May I take you home? I don't believe falling off a building will help you get down any faster. The man stated while Izuku looked down in shame, only for the stranger to place a gentle hand on his shoulder. And despite there being no face to read, Izuku could tell that the stranger was sympathetic in a way. I wouldn't mind, I'm completely off routine. But if you could, can you just drop me off at Mizudafa Station? I need to see someone. Izuku questioned while the mist man nodded before a swirling portal that was the same color as the man opened beside him. The stranger gestured for Izuku to enter. Izuku did so hesitantly while the stranger followed in after him. The two walked out of the vortex in a dimly lit alleyway, though Izuku could see the familiar buildings. Thank you, sir. Izuku bowed respectfully. Thank you as well, young one. I am Kurogiri. If you are ever to need anything, I will be happy to help. Kurogiri nodded to the boy as he turned and walked away. Izuku watched the man leave before he too took his leave. He knew that Kirishima had likely left the park by now, so he planned to go to Mrs. Tori's shop. He didn't want to be alone. But just as he had started walking the path to the flower shop, screams could be heard. And Izuku was ever curious, though as he came upon the crowd, his eyes blew wide at the sight. Bakugu was trapped by the same monster that had nearly killed him. And he was killing Bakugu. But the heroes were doing nothing. Izuku felt something inside him ache. He felt dread settle over him like a plague, as if death itself was clawing away at his soul, but he knew it was not him who would die if the apparition made its way in. It was as if his lungs were being squeezed once again. Was it because of what he'd just experienced? Was it because he too knew that feeling? Or was it something completely different? Izuku then looked out of the corner of his eye, and there stood All Might, still in his shriveled form. He did nothing as well. And a new kind of anger boiled inside of Izuku. So, he didn't think twice before he ran past the crowd, only to be stopped by one of the pro-heroes that were standing by, watching as the blonde fought the villain with all of his might, watching as the boy was dying by the actions of a villain that they were not attempting to stop. Let me go. He'll die. Do something. He'll die. Izuku hissed as he clawed at the hand of the pro who held him back. He could hear the hero speaking to him, no doubt trying to will him to stop, to go back, but he didn't listen, it was tuned out. Because all he could hear was the explosions and roars of the alpha that he couldn't bring himself to leave. Izuku could feel that apparition slowly making its way inside. He could feel the plague of death loom over him. And it only made him fight harder. He shouted in frustration and horror as he clawed and kicked at the pro who held him back. But he could feel his energy slowly dying. He could feel his will to save Bakugu increase as it died. It was horrifying. But just as Izuku's tears began to sting his eyes, a blur of a person ran out of an alleyway and to Bakugu. Kirishima had just been walking aimlessly. He couldn't help a few girls from his old school when a villain cornered them. He had frozen when he saw the villain and Mina step in. And he hadn't seen Izuku, but by the way, a horrible sense of dread loomed over him for a while and continued to say. He couldn't help but think that whatever was happening wasn't good. So, he left the park. He didn't know where he was going, but he was following his gut. But at the sounds of what he assumed was a large villain attack along with screams, his curiosity took the best of him as he ran down an alleyway, only to be taken back by the sight of a huge sludge monster holding a shouting blonde hostage, seemingly suffocating him while the blonde set off explosions from his palms. You picked the wrong guy to mess with? The blonde roared as he fought viscously against the monster. Kirishima then noticed the pros that were nearby, but they did nothing. It's going to kill him. Why won't they step in? Kirishima thought to himself as he peered from the inside of the alleyway. The boy gained tunnel vision from looking between the pros, the onlookers, and the roaring blonde. Though an especially loud roar and an explosion took his full attention, that same feeling increased as he looked at the blonde. It was like looking at death himself. The sludge villain was fully choking him now. He wouldn't last longer than a minute. He was going to die. And Kirishima couldn't help the way his very soul ached painfully at the idea. I can't stand still this time, Kirishima thought to himself. The boy immediately charged forward out of the safety of the alleyway as he hardened his hands and began to try and tear into the monster. What the F dash? The blonde boy shouted, looking down at the raven-haired boy. Take my hand. Kirishima screamed back at him, finally tearing through the villain long enough to reach the blonde's hand. The blonde boy immediately grabbed Kirishima's hand while Kirishima's feet hardened, tearing his shoes, as he used his feet as anchors to hold him in place as he struggled and pulled as hard as he could to get the boy out of the villain's hold. The blonde shooting out explosions from his palms as Kirishima began to entirely pull him out of the sludge. Though in a swift moment, a large hand grabbed both of them by the back of their shirts. Smash! Was roared by none other than All Might. The pro-hero blasted away the villain while the crowd cheered and the other pro-heroes ran forward. Though in the crowd, Izuku watched in shock before he swiftly left, being sure that he wasn't seen by either the blonde or the ravenet. Izuku went back to his path, but he saw how no one around him blurred. He could see them all clearly. And that only made him even more anxious. Though as Izuku neared the flower shop, his stomach dropped at the sign on the front door. Closed. Mrs. Tori wasn't there, and neither was Haita. Another broken piece of the routine. Izuku walked past the shop quickly, not wanting to dwell on the sight of the dark shop where he had wished to seek comfort in. Nothing blurred, Izuku saw and heard everything, and it only made his anxiety spike higher. Though soon the noises, the sights, everything. It became too much. And he started sprinting, his legs moving as fast as his muscles would allow. And within only a few minutes, he was home, slamming the front door behind him and not bothering to take his shoes off as he ran to his room. Izuku closed his door and slid down the wall, gripping his hair as he tried with all of his might to rein in the approaching panic attack. He tried every breathing exercise his father had ever taught him. He tried finding something to ground him in his surroundings. But nothing worked. Everything kept becoming too much. He could hardly keep his hands from dropping anything he tried to latch onto to help ground him. His trembling form caused his entire body to ache as his muscles spasmed, and his lungs burned from the effort to take in even the slightest breath of air. It was as if he had just been running a whole marathon without a single break. He couldn't breathe. He hardly even noticed when his body moved on its own. Finally, he opened his eyes as the tears he had been so desperate to fight off broke past his barriers and stung his eyes, and dampened his face. But Izuku only continued to hyperventilate. His own reflection was blurry and unrecognizable in the mirror. It was as if he was staring at a completely different person. And he despised whom he was staring at. Stop it. Stop it all. Guts, please. I can't do this. Please. Izuku didn't know whom he was pleading to, but he hoped that someone, anyone at all, would show him even the faintest amount of mercy. Anything at all to make the pain finally stop. Everything was breaking. Izuku scowled at the blurry and unrecognizable reflection. He balled his fists and punched his mirror with a shout of pure frustration and pain, and even when the glass had already shattered, his knuckles bloody and mangled, he didn't stop. He only continued to punch the broken frame where the mirror had once been intact. But finally, Izuku registered the pain. But it didn't faze him. At least not the feeling. But the sight was enough to make him fall to his knees, his lungs still struggling for air as he stared at his hands. Though it wasn't his knuckles that horrified him. It was how his arms were stained with the crimson color, staining his clothes and his skin, and his bathroom wall and floor splattered with his blood. It looked as if someone had died. Perhaps someone did. But he only stared. He made no move to clean the blood, stop the bleeding from his mangled hands, or to even breathe. He knew what to do. A distant part of him screamed at him to move, to do something to help himself, to fix what he had broken. But he only stood slowly, and in the little shards of the shattered mirror that remained intact on the wall, Izuku saw himself, and for once, he recognized whom he saw. But he still hated whom he saw. He just stared in awe. He looked down at the counter where blood stained the porcelain of the sink and the wood of the cabinets. There was blood everywhere. And a part of Izuku was vaguely aware that it was not just his hands that were injured. Izuku began to smile, the pain from his entire body hardly even registering in his mind as he backed up against the wall and slid down to the floor, staring up at his bathroom ceiling with a tired smile while he laughed out his sobs. He had broken the routine. But it also broke himself. Hisashi groaned as he stepped into his house, his joints aching from the long day at the hospital. Lately, more and more people had been coming in due to random attacks, and it was becoming worrying, especially with how close a couple of the attacks were to his home. Though what had his mind reeling throughout his shift was the fact that Izuku hadn't answered a few of his texts. Of course, the man wasn't one to jump the gun and freak out. He figured Izuku was either engrossed in his reading his hero notebook, or he fell asleep. But regardless, he couldn't shake the gut-wrenching feeling that something wasn't right. "Hey, I'm home," Hisashi called, hoping that Izuku would come out of his room to greet him. He knew his wife was either dead to the world in her room or out somewhere. Hisashi raised an eyebrow in question as he put his things down and hung up his coat, Izuku having not come to greet him as normal. "Buttonflower? You fall asleep?" Hisashi questioned as he went to Izuku's door, placing his ear against the door to see if he could hear anything, only to furrow his eyebrows in confusion when he didn't hear anything. "Izuku? Hun, can I come in?" Hisashi questioned as he knocked on the door, only to be met with no response. "Izuku, I'm coming in," Hisashi declared as he opened the door, only to find Izuku's room empty, but his bathroom light was on, the door barely open, allowing the small sliver of light to leak into the otherwise pitch-black room. "Izuku? Buttonflower, is everything okay?" Hisashi questioned as he stepped to Izuku's bathroom, only to be met with no response yet. Again, Hisashi's stomach sank slightly, so he didn't bother asking to enter. The man opened the door to the bathroom slowly, only to shout in horror at the sight before him. Izuku sat against the wall, seemingly unconscious. His knuckles and hands were bloody and mangled. Small glass shards stuck out from his mangled hands and in parts of his arms. His mirror was in complete shambles. Glass shards covered the sink and the floor, along with the horrible sight of the dried crimson blood. Hisashi immediately jumped into action and grabbed Izuku, the boy not even reacting as his father manhandled him and placed him in the living room while Hisashi ran to his room and grabbed the first aid kit he kept. "Izuku, come on, Buttonflower, please answer me. Come on, baby, it's okay, answer me." Hisashi begged as he kneeled in front of Izuku, desperately rummaging through his first aid bag to grab what he needed. His heart ran faster than he ever felt before, and he was horrified when he finally caught a glimpse of his son's eyes. His pupils were so dilated that Hisashi was sure that if he wasn't fully aware of the gray that surrounded the black pupils in thin strips, he would have thought his son's eyes went completely black. Izuku's eyes shouldn't be gray. Hisashi paused, only for a moment as he stared in horror at the sight of his son's eyes. The once emerald green that matched his own was gone, replaced by a lifeless gray. Hisashi knew what that entailed. It was a drop. Hisashi moved even faster to wrap up his son's hands and arms. He knew that it would only last him so long, but he knew that he needed to wake up the boy first. "Izuku, come on, hun, please. Respond to me. Come on, Buttonflower, it's okay. I'm here. Please." Hisashi begged as he cupped Izuku's face, tears burning at his eyes while Izuku's gray and nearly lifeless eyes stared back at him, glazed over. "Izuku, come on, sweetheart. Please. Answer me, please, Izuku." Hisashi cried as he pulled Izuku into his chest, uncaring of the way Izuku's bloodied arms and hands ruined his shirt. Hisashi tucked Izuku's head under his chin, pressing Izuku's body as close as he could to his own. "Please, Izuku, it'll be okay now, hun. I'm here, please come back to me." Hisashi sobbed, pressing his hand to the pulse point on Izuku's neck, only to choke on a sob when he felt how weak the boy's pulse was. Hisashi held his son close to him, gently rubbing his hand on Izuku's neck, praying to the gods that he wouldn't lose his son. He knew what drops could do to an Omega, especially one as young as Izuku. At the least, it would result in the Omega having a fever and being affected in the same way one would be if one had a cold. In the worst scenarios, the Omega would go unresponsive and their heart rate would drop, and after so long, If they are unable to pull out of that headspace, the lack of blood flow would cause a seizure. And it would kill them. Time passed slowly. Hisashi knew there truly was nothing else he could do for his son except hold him and pray that Izuku would register anything at all. His scent, his body heat, his voice. Anything. But with each passing minute, Hisashi's tears never stopped and Izuku never moved. Then his mind began to race. What had happened? What caused this? Could he have prevented this? What brought his son so close to the edge? Who was to blame? Hisashi hardly breathed as his thoughts ran through his mind. He searched every part of his memory for any type of sign of this. For any warning. But there was nothing. Hisashi, what are you doing? Inko questioned as she exited her room, Izuku going by unnoticed to her. Though Hisashi felt every muscle go stiff, every limb tense with pent-up horror, anger, and pain. You've been home. Hisashi's question came out as a growl. He tightened his jaw to keep himself at bay, trying to refrain from his quirk getting out of hand. Smoke already steamed from his mouth. Yes? Why? Inko sassed, once again her son's unconscious body going by completely unnoticed, shielded by the doctor. Did you not hear it? The glass shattering? Did you not hear anything? Hisashi growled. He gently placed Izuku on the couch, draping a blanket over him. The man stood, and finally, Inko noticed her son. Inko went to draw closer to the couch, trying to inspect her son, only for Hisashi to quickly crowd her space. The man glared down at her, his eyes piercing through her soul. Inko gasped softly and backed away. She tried to glare at her husband, but it was clear that the hesitance in her eyes was from fear. You didn't hear him crying? His eyes are swollen, I know he cried. You didn't hear the mirror shattering? You didn't hear him punching the wall? Hisashi questioned, his fist shaking from his pent-up rage. He wanted to scream, he wanted to throw the woman that stood in front of him out of his house. But he held back, he needed an explanation. I didn't dash. Bullshit. Do you care so little for your own son that you didn't care to check on him? That when you heard a mirror shattering from his room that you don't even bother to see if he needs help? You care so little that when every noise finally stops, you don't even check on him to make sure he's okay? Hisashi roared, smoke billowed from his mouth, and he could practically taste the fire liking at the back of his throat. Every instinct inside of him begged him to attack, to protect his child, but his better judgment kept him at bay. Hisashi I-. He's an effing drop Inko. He could die. Do you not care? Hisashi felt hot tears sting his eyes as they broke free from their confinements. Small sparks burned his tongue, the fire inside of him roaring alongside him, fighting to be let out. Inko's eyes widened as she looked past Hisashi to Izuku. The boy's back was facing her, but even then, she could see the weak rise and fall of the boy's chest. Though Hisashi moved into her line of sight, shielding Izuku once again. Inko did her best to scowl at her husband, trying her best to hide the way she trembled in fear at the fury in the alpha's eyes. I do care for him, Hisashi. Inko argued. She tried to stand tall, doing her best to appear confident. Hisashi growled at her, the low rumble in his chest only furthering the roaring inferno inside of him. Liar! You don't care about him. You don't care about me. You're a heartless, cruel, and inhumane woman. You have the gall to lie when you've done nothing but prove the opposite his entire life. Hisashi roared, and small sparks of the flames inside him escaped his mouth as he continued to rage. Though Inko steeled her expression, her own quirk activating without her knowledge nor consent. Small objects around them began to levitate before dropping to the ground repeatedly, creating a beating rhythm around the couple. How do you know what I feel, Hisashi? The minute Izuku was born, that was it. My purpose to you was served. You didn't give a shit about me after that. Inko shouted while Hisashi snarled at the beta. I loved you. I doubt that I don't love you now. Despite everything you've done. Hisashi bit out, his gaze trained to the ground as he attempted to steady his stance, trying to hold back everything inside him that was fighting to break free. And you call me the liar, Hisashi? You dash. Get out, Hisashi commanded, cutting Inko off. What? Inko screeched. Get out. Hisashi roared, fire erupting from the man's throat and escaping out of his mouth, narrowly missing Inko's face as the woman scrambled back from the flames. "Get out of my house. I don't give a shit if you come back. Leave," Hisashi commanded. The man's exhales continued to escape as small flicks of fire and smoke streamed from his mouth. Inko scrambled to get to the front door, barely putting her shoes on as she ran. Hisashi stomped to the front door, slamming it closed and locking it, trying his best to calm himself down and lower his temperature. "Dad." Hisashi flinched at the sound of the weak voice. He turned quickly only to find Izuku pulling himself up, using the armrest of the couch as an anchor. Hisashi ran over quickly, kneeling in front of Izuku while he gently led the boy to look at him. The man gasped softly at the sight of Izuku's eyes. The pupils had thankfully shrunken back to the normal size, though the gray still overtook all color in his eyes, small flecks of green hardly visible in the stormy clouds of Izuku's gaze. "Izuku, hun, it's okay. I'm here," Hisashi reassured. The man gently cupped the boy's face, rubbing the skin underneath Izuku's left eye gently while Izuku only continued to stare at his father with the same blank and unyielding gaze. Hisashi only sighed as he grabbed the first aid kit. Gently, he took off the bandages that he had wrapped Izuku's arms and hands with, only to cringe at the sight of the mangled skin and dried blood, along with small shards of glass that had dug their way into Izuku's skin. "I have to get these out, it might hurt," Hisashi stated as he pulled out a pair of tweezers, though Izuku didn't react to his father's statement. Nor did he react when Hisashi began to dab Izuku's arms and hands with alcohol and carefully pull the shards out of his skin. Hisashi watched Izuku's reactions and expressions as he worked on his hands and arms, though the man's chest squeezed anxiously as he watched Izuku's gaze remain the same. His stormy gaze was unyielding, yet at the same time, Hisashi could tell that his son wasn't even in this plane of reality. He knew where he was. The clouds. At least, that's what Izuku had always called it. Honestly, Hisashi should have foreseen something like this coming. The day Izuku came to him explaining the way that his mind took him somewhere new, somewhere he felt like he was floating, there were stars that he loved to stare at, and somewhere that no matter what happened or what was said, he didn't feel or hear it. Hisashi knew that technically speaking, the medical term for the clouds was a pseudo-drop. But he didn't want to believe it. He had told Izuku to come to him if there was ever an urge to go into that space. And Izuku never spoke about it after that, so he had assumed that it was a one-time thing. And despite the times he saw Izuku's gaze venture so far off, that it was so clear that the boy wasn't even in the same plane as reality. Hisashi tried to convince himself that his son just had his overactive mind working on overdrive. He tried to relate to some of his son's behaviors. They both had overactive minds, but deep down, Hisashi knew that something different was going on. But he just never had the heart to admit it to himself or Izuku. He knew that if he told Izuku about pseudo-drops and every risk that they came with, including making the chance for a real drop to occur, the boy would be horrified and immediately link it to the clouds. And Hisashi just didn't have the heart to scare his son in such a way, no matter how much truth would come with the admission. Once Hisashi was done, he sighed heavily as he stared at his son's hands. He knew they were going to take a while to heal. But what made it so much worse was the fact that Izuku hadn't even reacted throughout the whole procedure to wrap them up. "Izuku-kun, can you hear me?" Hisashi questioned gently, softly pressing his palm against Izuku's cheek. The boy inhaled shakily as he blinked a few times, a bit of the gray retreating and allowing the gorgeous specks of green to decorate Izuku's eyes. Izuku looked down at his father for a moment, clearly trying to process what was going on. Though Hisashi merely stood slowly, allowing Izuku's eyes to follow him without any strain. "How about we eat something, okay, button flower?" Hisashi offered while Izuku nodded slowly and allowed his father to help him stand and guide him to sit at the kitchen island. Hisashi cooked dinner in silence, and neither tried to break the horrible tension with any small talk or even music. Instead, they both stayed silent as Hisashi cooked and Izuku traced every speck of blood that had stained the outside of his wrappings. Finally, Hisashi had finished their food and set in on the island, taking his seat next to Izuku as the boy nodded politely in thanks to his father. The silence only continued as they ate, neither moved to break it, but neither enjoyed it. But as they finished, Hisashi sighed heavily and looked at his son with a sympathetic and sorrowful expression. Izuku, we need to talk about this, Hisashi stated softly, and Izuku only nodded in response. Hisashi sighed as he turned his body to face Izuku, while the boy did the same. Izuku, do you understand what this is? Do you know what the clouds really are? Hisashi questioned while Izuku went to open his mouth to reply, only to close it again and shake his head as an answer. Izuku, the clouds aren't. The clouds. They aren't a good thing, hun. You going into that space is called a pseudo-drop. Hisashi began to explain while Izuku's eyes widened slightly, though his otherwise emotionless expression did not change. A pseudo-drop is like a drop but without the major side effects of one. It allows you to go into the headspace of a drop, just without the severity of pain that a real one causes. But Izuku, going into that space so regularly as I know you do, this can lead to the chances of a real drop occurring. And I believe you understand what a real drop is like now because that's what you are going through right now. Hisashi explained while Izuku looked down at his lap, clearly contemplating everything that had just been said. Though when the boy looked back up at Hisashi with tears glistening in his eyes, the man moved quickly to hug his son tightly, cooing to him softly as Izuku sniffled and coughed, his cries clearly trying to come out despite the pain it was causing their owner. That's it, Izuku, it's all right, Buttonflower, let it out. I know it hurts. I'm sorry, just let it out. Hisashi ordered gently, rubbing Izuku's back soothingly as the boy began to sob, crying his poor heart out while Hisashi didn't try to fight his own tears that fell from his eyes. His heart tore into pieces at every sound and sight of his son crying his heart out. But he didn't move, he didn't speak, he merely held him protectively and cried along with him. Once Izuku's sob had come to a stop and only soft sniffling was left, Hisashi grabbed a few napkins and handed a few to Izuku while he wiped his face, Izuku doing the same. Dad. Izuku started softly, and Hisashi immediately sat back in his chair so he could see Izuku's face clearly. Yes, Buttonflower? Hisashi asked as he gently led Izuku to look at him while he pushed a few of his bangs out of his eyes. How long? How long did you know about? About the clouds? Why didn't you tell me? Izuku asked softly, while Hisashi smiled sadly at his son. I've known since you first came to me when you were young, when you told me about that special place that let you feel like you were flying. I knew what it was, that's why I told you to come to me if you felt that urge to go into that space. But regardless, I also knew that you went into that space more and more, especially when I wasn't around. Hisashi started while Izuku only stared at his father sadly. But I've been selfish. I didn't want to admit to myself that this was happening because if I truly admitted it to myself, I knew that I would have to take you somewhere, and the places that Omegas have to go for this sort of thing would have been horrifying to you as a child, it would have traumatized you. And as you got older, I suppose I just continued lying to myself. Because I didn't want to have to give you up. Hisashi bowed his head shamefully, his tears once again stinging his eyes. Izuku stared at his father, horrified. Not with the fact that he had been lied to, but because there was a chance that he would have been taken away. Give me up? Am I that broken? Izuku asked softly, tears welling in his eyes once more while Hisashi immediately moved to cradle the boy's face. No, Izuku, you're not. I was never going to give you up. Hisashi stated, though Izuku noticed the way his father couldn't bring himself to say that Izuku wasn't broken. Why would have to? Izuku questioned as he sniffled. Hisashi merely sighed as he wiped away his son's tears, pressing a kiss to the boy's hair. I wouldn't have had to give you up truly. At least not completely. But if I were to have checked you into a hospital for something like this, a mandatory search would have been done, and if they found anything in your life, home, or at school that they deemed unsafe, then they would not have allowed you to return home, even if I changed absolutely everything where we lived, where you went to school. They still most likely wouldn't have let you come home. In most cases, they would have put you in foster care until someone decided to adopt you. Or in the rarest case, until they deemed your home life safe again. Hisashi explained while Izuku stared at his father in horror. But home is safe. You're safe. They can't do that. Izuku argued while Hisashi smiled sadly. Izuku, honestly, if they would have taken you because of how your mother is, I wouldn't have blamed them. And I know those kids at your school can still be JRKS to you. And hun, it doesn't matter if something is even a little hair out of place, they'd still take you. It is so rare that they don't take the kid, or even return them home. Even if the child begs to come home. Hisashi explained sadly while Izuku shook his head and stood, clinging to his father tightly while Hisashi hugged the boy protectively. Izuku, I know they would have taken you. That's why I was so selfish. Because I couldn't bear the thought of losing you. I'm so sorry, Button Flower. But I just couldn't do it. I wanted to protect you. But I'm so sorry. Hisashi cried as he hugged Izuku closer to him, while the boy only tightened his hold on his father. I don't care about that, Dad. I didn't want to leave you then, and I don't want to leave you now. So, please don't make me. Izuku pleaded while Hisashi kneeled as he cradled his son's face once again, wiping away the boy's tears as Izuku did the same to his own. I'll never make you leave, Izuku. But I'll never stop you if that's what you want. So, if you want to go to the hospital and we can talk to them about this, then that's okay. Don't worry about me, I'll be okay, and I'll work it all out. Just know that this is completely your choice. Hisashi urged while Izuku sniffled and nodded. I want to stay home. I don't want to go there, Dad. I want to be with you. Izuku stated as he wrapped his arms around his father's shoulders and hugged him tightly, Hisashi doing the same around Izuku's torso. Then you'll stay home. If that's what you want. But Izuku, please, hun. I need to know what happened. What pushed you this far? Hisashi questioned, though he panicked slightly when he felt Izuku go stiff in his arms. Button Flower. Hisashi urged softly, hesitantly stroking his son's hair while the boy only pushed his face into his father's shoulder. It hurt. Dad, it hurt so much. Izuku cried while Hisashi tried to coax Izuku to look at him, only for the boy to further push his face into his father's shoulder. Izuku, what hurt? Please tell me. Hisashi urged while Izuku sniffled before he pulled himself back and wiped his eyes, though Hisashi sighed in relief when he saw that the Omega's eyes had returned to their natural emerald shade. It started at school and then I met All Might today. Izuku breathed while Hisashi's heart dropped, knowing immediately that Izuku's meeting with his childhood hero wasn't a pleasant experience. Izuku, what happened? Hisashi asked once again as he led Izuku over to the couch, the two sitting down together while Izuku quickly clung to his father's shirt and Hisashi pulled Izuku to sit in between his legs while he combed his fingers through the boy's hair. At school, we were talking about our future careers, and it got brought up that I registered for UA. Everyone made fun of me for it when I said I was trying for either the hero course or the Gen Ed course to be a doctor. Izuku explained softly while Hisashi pursed his lips to hold back the snarl at the idea of Izuku's classmates acting so cruelly to his son, and for no good reason at that. Anything else happen at school? Hisashi asked softly, keeping his tone gentle and quiet. Someone told me to take a swan dive off the roof of the school so that way in my next life I could have a quirk. Izuku admitted before he buried his face in his father's chest, crying softly while Hisashi only tightened his hold around Izuku. Hisashi remained silent, his eye blown wide in shock. He knew that Izuku's peers could be cruel in their teasing, but to go as far as suicide baiting? And then for Izuku to come so close to death because of a drop? He was barely holding himself back from allowing his quirk to unleash itself without his consent once again. But he could already feel the fire beginning to burn the back of his throat. He could practically smell the smoke that was raging inside of his lungs begging to be released. While every part of him screamed at him to do something, to go find out who the little beast was that had told his son to kill himself. But he held himself back. He could hold himself back, but only for Izuku. What else happened? You said that you met All Might? Hisashi rasped out. His throat was becoming sore due to the fire that he refused to unleash, but he could ignore it. It didn't matter to him at the moment. I was attacked by some sludge villain. He tried to choke me out, but All Might showed up and stopped him. I ended up accidentally clinging onto All Might's leg when he took off, and we had to land on some roof of a skyscraper. Izuku trailed off, And this is where Hisashi could tell that the meeting went south. But he stayed silent regardless. Despite the way his anxiety only increased when Izuku stated he was attacked by a villain, he would have to do a full checkup later to make sure everything was okay. He told me that I couldn't be a hero. Because I don't have a quirk and because I'm an Omega. And then he left. Izuku admitted as he sniffled, his tears making the corners of his eyes dry and sore, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't stop them from flowing. He left you on the roof of a skyscraper. After you had just been attacked by a villain? Hisashi questioned, though Izuku could tell it truly wasn't a question, but more of a statement that the man was trying to wrap his head around. So, the boy stayed silent and waited for his father to fully process the admission. Though Hisashi was livid. He never knew that he could despise someone so much. Especially not a pro-hero, and most definitely not the symbol of peace. His son's childhood hero. How could that man be called a hero when he decimated a child's dreams in the cruelest and sexist way imaginable, only to then leave him on the roof of a building after he had just been attacked by a villain and told to kill himself? The fire inside of him was roaring again. It was fighting him, trying to unleash itself and burn anyone that came too close. But Hisashi held back. He knew there was more. Even though he knew he might just be on his way to prison if the admission that someone else decided to harm Izuku in any way came up. Is there anything else, hun? Hisashi spoke softly, his voice hoarse though Izuku still found such comfort in it. I nearly jumped. At that Hisashi's grip tightened, but he remained silent while Izuku nuzzled into his father's chest, trying to soothe his anxiety that was clear as day to the boy. But someone found me. I don't know who he was, but he was nice to me. He stopped me from jumping and made sure I got back to the station safely. Then I came home and this happened. Izuku raised his hand, displaying the bandages while Hisashi gingerly took his son's hand and rubbed his thumb against his bandaged knuckles gently. I'm so sorry, Izuku. Hisashi breathed as he hugged Izuku tightly, while the boy could only hug his father back, not having the words to describe how he felt. I think it's best if you stay home from now on, Hisashi stated softly while Izuku thought for a moment before he nodded in response. I think so too, Dad. Over the week that had passed, and true to what Hisashi had said, Izuku stayed home. Inko hadn't returned, and honestly, neither he nor Hisashi cared all that much. Izuku and Hisashi had discussed the idea of therapy for at least an hour, though they came to the agreement that since Izuku didn't feel comfortable with going to a stranger, every day Izuku would write in a new journal about his day. So that later he could explain what went through his mind so Hisashi could analyze it later and they could talk it out. It was a fair trade in both of their eyes. Especially since Hisashi pulled Izuku out of school, starting the boy up with online school to complete his lessons. Though Izuku wasn't as thrilled with that. Mainly because with no longer being allowed at school he wasn't to leave the house without his father unless he was only going to the flower shop. She and Haida had been alerted of the whole situation. And with that, Izuku couldn't see Kirishima. But he decided that it was for the best, at least for the time being. The boy fully planned to explain everything to him at a later date. When everything was better. And with that, a new routine was started. Button flower, time to wake up, hun. Hisashi called through his son's door. Izuku slowly rose from his bed, instinctively going to his closet to get his uniform, only to realize that he no longer needed it. The boy sighed heavily as he closed his closet door and entered his bathroom. The mirror had been replaced, though Izuku still couldn't bring himself to remove the tarp from it. He didn't want to see what he saw last time. Izuku was in and out of the shower, not taking any longer than he normally did. He changed into his regular clothes, leaving his hair damp. Though at the smell of breakfast, Izuku tried to hide the way his stomach lurched. His appetite still had been non-existent. How did you sleep, button flower? Hisashi questioned as Izuku sat at the island, smiling at his father when the man placed the bowl of rice and eggs in front of him. Though the way his stomach churned made him cringe. I slept fine. Thanks, Dad. Izuku smiled nervously, thankful that his father didn't notice, instead digging into his own food. It's just rice and eggs, I can do this. Just for Dad. Izuku thought to himself as he grabbed his fork and shoved a bit into his mouth. He tried his hardest not to GG. He tried so hard to just chew it, ignoring the way his stomach was practically stabbing at him. Upon swallowing, he nearly coughed up his food. Regardless, he stomached it and smiled at his father when Hisashi looked over at him. Be sure to get some lunch from the fridge, hun. I'll call here in a little bit to check up on you, okay? Hisashi ruffled Izuku's hair gently while the boy nodded, smiling at his father up until the moment he left, where his expression then dropped. It was quiet. He didn't like the quiet. So, he grabbed his bowl and poured the rest of his uneaten breakfast into the trash can, covering up the remains of his meal with a few paper towels. Izuku then headed to his room, turning on his speaker as he tuned it to his phone, sighing in relief when music began to softly play throughout his room, cutting through the deafening silence. The schoolwork was simple, hardly anything that Izuku wasn't used to before. Though he instinctively looked around every now and then, being sure that no one was coming up behind him or looking at him. Only to remember that he was alone, there was no one else but him and his own mind. Izuku shook off the feeling and continued with his work. Though Izuku was shocked out of his headspace when the familiar ringtone of his father blared through his speaker. The boy winced as he disconnected the device and answered the call. Hey, Dad. Hey, Buttonflower, how are you feeling? I feel okay, Dad. But, all right, just call me if you need anything, okay? Have you eaten yet? Yeah, I ate a little bit ago. But, good, I'll see you in a little while. Love you, hun. I love you too, Dad. Why had lying become so easy? Izuku remembered the times when lying had once been nearly impossible for him. The earliest memory he had was when he was still young, just a fragment of the memory, though he could see it clearly. His father had found him sneaking a snack from the kitchen right before dinner. Izuku had hidden it under a pillow on the couch, and Hisashi hadn't yelled or gotten angry with him. But the memory of his father laughing, claiming that Izuku was indeed a poor liar, but that being a bad liar was a good thing rang clear and through the memory. Perhaps he still was a bad liar? At least around his father. But then that would mean Hisashi knew every time Izuku lied about his emotions and other things such as that. He didn't like that idea. He knew that his father would never push as far as to force him to share what he didn't want to. But still, the idea that his father knew all along and didn't step in until it was nearly too late? He hated that idea more so than anything else. He preferred to believe he had just gained experience with his lies and that he genuinely was fooling his father, no matter how guilty he felt for it. Izuku sighed heavily when he felt his stomach growl unhappily at him, demanding him to eat, despite the way food still made him feel nauseous at the mere idea. But knowing better than to ignore his body, Izuku strode into the kitchen, cutting up a small bowl of fruit. Izuku went back to his work, reconnecting his speaker to his phone to once again spread music throughout his room. Though Izuku jumped once again when an alarm went off, it was the one he had set to alert him that this would be the time school officially ended. Which was fine, he had already finished all of his work long before his alarm rang. He had merely been doing a few extra research studies on the ways of cardiology. Izuku sighed as he stood from his seat, groaning when his vision blurred and he became lightheaded. He shook off the dizziness and disconnected his speaker. He opened his drawers and pulled out his workout clothes. Changing quickly, Izuku connected his headphones and tucked his phone into his pocket. The boy purposefully took the long route to Mrs. Tori's. He enjoyed running by the water and to the flower shop. It gave him something to watch, and it allowed him to keep up his physical stamina, along with the other workout routines he did in the privacy of his own home. But as the boy came upon the bridge that overpassed the water, he was shocked to find that same mist man standing at the railing, seemingly staring down at the water, that is until his head turned to Izuku as the boy approached. Hello, young one. It is good to see you again. May I ask how you have been? The mist man, Kurojiri questioned. Though Izuku approached him slowly, looking up at the man hesitantly before looking down at the water, rubbing his still bandaged hand and arm sheepishly. I'm okay, how are you? Izuku asked softly, suddenly feeling like he was being watched. I am well, though I had hoped to ask you about our last meeting if you would not be too bothered, Kurojiri stated while Izuku bit his lip nervously. A part of him had been hoping that the man wouldn't question that first impression. It's okay, I don't mind. Izuku tried to smile, only to falter when a misty hand was placed on his shoulder. There is no need to hide behind a mask here. I will not judge. I just have a few questions. Kurojiri stated while Izuku looked up at him in surprise for a moment before his expression dropped, revealing his true tired demeanor. May I ask why? Kurojiri questioned while Izuku looked at the man questioningly. I don't know what you mean, Izuku stated softly. Why were you trying to take your life? Kurojiri clarified though Izuku flinched at the question, hearing it put into words so bluntly was painful, but strangely comforting. I'm tired. I'm tired of absolutely everything. Izuku shouted, only to cover his mouth, hesitantly looking at the man, expecting some kind of negative reaction to his outburst. Though Kurojiri only nodded in response. May I ask what exactly it is that you are tired of? Kurojiri questioned while Izuku looked down at the water, following each ripple with his eyes. I'm tired of hiding. I'm tired of being hurt by people I wish I couldn't love anymore. I'm tired of the bullying. I'm tired of being me. Izuku stated softly, glaring down at the water where his reflection stared back up at him as if it was a distorted vision. Unrecognizable. I see, though I can imagine that your interaction with All Might did not help with these problems? Kurojiri guessed while Izuku looked surprised for a moment, though he never moved his gaze from the water, nodding curtly. I didn't overhear the conversation you two most likely had. May I know what he said? Kurojiri asked while Izuku bit his lower lip while his hands balled at his sides. The boy's body vibrated with anger and so much pain. He stubbornly held back the tears, despite the way his eyes burned from the hot tears in his eyes. He told me that I can't be a hero. Because I'm quirkless. And because I'm an Omega. Izuku stated bitterly while Kurojiri turned to the boy with what could have been surprise, though Izuku couldn't tell. Quirkless and an Omega? Kurojiri questioned while Izuku nodded hesitantly, waiting for the expected negative reaction. My, what an interesting specimen you are. That's incredibly rare. Amazing potential. Kurojiri stated as he turned back to face the water, though Izuku looked up at the mist man with surprise. Only for a small smile to spread his lips as he looked back down. If I may, I'm guessing that in the same way as All Might. Others have told you similar things. Kurojiri guessed while Izuku's expression turned downcast once again as he scowled at the water below. Just my entire life. Everyone I used to call a friend. My own mother. They've all hated me for it. And I just don't understand why. Izuku shouted, his tears burning his cheeks as they broke through his walls. Kurojiri only turned to face Izuku once more, placing a hand on his shoulder. The boy looked up at the man, only for Kurojiri to nod, signaling him to continue. I've been hated my entire life. All because of something I can't control. I've lost nearly everyone in my life because I just couldn't learn to stay in my place. Because I want. I wanted to be a hero. Izuku cried. The boy furiously wiped at his eyes, trying to rid his face of the tears that stained his cheeks, only for fresh tears to take their place. Why be a hero? Kurojiri asked while Izuku looked up at this man, who was still nearly a stranger to him, with surprise. Why wouldn't I want to be one? I want to help people. Izuku answered softly, wiping his face a final time, his cheeks and eyes rubbed red from his bandages. Heroes. They care about nothing but money and their own glory and fame. None of them do it for the right reason anymore. There are no such things as true heroes anymore. But I don't believe you are like that, young one. Kurojiri stated strongly, and once again, Izuku swore he heard an echo in his voice. As if he wasn't the only one speaking. What? No, I'm sure that there are still good ones. Kiri. Kaken. They want to be heroes. They have to be good. Izuku argued, though the way his chest ached painfully at the mere mention of the two alphas made him halt. You say this, young one. And yet they have caused you such pain. I don't believe heroes are meant to do that. Kurojiri stated as he pointed to Izuku's chest. The boy immediately gripped his shirt, right in front of his heart while he stared at the mist man in shock. Kiri. He's never hurt me. He's a good person. He'll be an amazing hero. Izuku argued weakly, his chest still aching. And yet you clutch your chest in pain. And what about the other? Kaken, he has hurt you. Has he not? Kurojairi asked, though Izuku could tell the question was more so of a statement. I know he doesn't really mean it. He can't really mean it. Izuku's voice died slightly, his confidence in his argument slowly dwindling. What was it you said, Kaken? Take a swan dive? Is that not what you said? Is that not his name? Kurojairi quoted Izuku's words while the Omega's eyes widened in horror at the memory. His grip on his shirt only tightened, and he was sure he would nearly rip a hole in the garment if he gripped any harder. Izuku tried to speak, though the lump in his throat, caused by his tears, only choked him. He told you to kill yourself. Did he not? Kurojairi asked, though Izuku couldn't give a response. Instead, he fell to his knees and curled in on himself, leaning against the railing of the bridge. The boy sobbed, trying to muffle himself by covering his mouth and ducking his head. Though Kurojairi knelt and brushed away Izuku's hair from his face. When Izuku's sobs finally died down, he sniffled when he looked up at the mist man, his eyes bloodshot and his cheeks rubbed raw. Kurojairi helped the boy to his feet, brushing Izuku's hair out his face while the boy coughed to clear his throat of the lump from his tears. I ask again, young one. Why be a hero? Why be like someone who's caused you so much pain? Why be like the hero who abandoned you on a roof and told you to abandon your dreams? Kurojairi asked, though Izuku couldn't give a response. He only looked down, clearly in thought. Kurojairi waited for a moment before turning away from Izuku. As I have said before, if ever need assistance, I am more than willing to help, young one. Izuku Midoriya. Kurojairi twisted his torso to look back at Izuku. Pardon me? Izuku Midoriya. That's my name. I have yours, but you don't have mine. So, Izuku Midoriya. Izuku smiled sadly while Kurojairi nodded politely to the boy. A pleasure, Midoriya. We will meet again. Kurojairi stated as he left. Izuku stared after him for a moment before looking down at his reflection in the water once more. Though this time, his reflection was blurred and completely unseen. And it begged the question to himself, why be a hero? And if not a hero, what else? Izuku didn't stay long to ponder his questions. Instead, he continued his run to the flower shop. Mrs. Tori greeted him as always, starting a conversation nearly immediately while she and Izuku moved around the shop methodically, cleaning and keeping themselves busy while Mrs. Tori told her seemingly endless stories. Hours passed and Izuku didn't mind. He left not too long after 3, continuing his run and other workout procedures that he followed like a well-timed clock. He tried to keep any remnants of his past routine, holding on to the shattered pieces of his life that he himself had shattered. But he couldn't hold on to the park. He knew he couldn't see Kirishima, not yet. Anyways, perhaps when they both made it to UA, when he would inevitably join the general ed program and Kirishima would join the hero course. Then maybe he could see Bakugo as well, maybe they could become friends again, or at the very least convince the blonde to no longer hate him. Don't hope. Don't wish for dreams. Izuku reminded himself in a whisper, wiping the sweat from his brow, having just finished his workout. He peeled off his shirt and undid his bandages, hissing at the sting when the gauze pulled off of his mangled limbs. There would no doubt be scars, but perhaps they could become a good reminder one day. A reminder of who he was. A reminder of his past that could hopefully drive him forward. But perhaps they could also be a reminder of how weak he was. How he forced his father to rid their household of his mother. A reminder of every negative thing in his life. But he supposed he'd have to wait and see for the outcome. Izuku fiddled with his necklace thoughtlessly as he sat at his desk, letting his body cool off before getting in the shower. Izuku pulled out his hero journal and his phone, going to the news to see if there were any new fights that he could use to update his journal. Though at the feel of the rough texture, Izuku looked down at the book, only to frown at the sight of the harsh scorch marks. That day came back to him. The words. The pain it all caused. Everything. And yet, he felt a part of himself miss the explosive boy who had vandalized his journal. Izuku scowled at the feeling in his chest, shoving his book away as he placed his phone face down. But this can't be fair. I shouldn't miss him. I really shouldn't miss either of them. I knew that Kiri would leave eventually, always happens. So, I just cut out the middleman. Kaken. Too confusing, I should have just given up on that a long time ago. Izuku spoke aloud, trying to reason with himself before he stared up at the ceiling, letting out a loud shout of frustration. Izuku allowed his chair to fall back with a thump, the boy groaning when his head hit the floor. He stared up at the ceiling with disdain. Nothing makes sense. Izuku shouted to himself, raking his hands over his face as he rolled over and pushed himself to his knees, fixing his chair while he looked at his hands with sorrow. I know this is hard on Dad. I can't see either of them, I can't leave the house unless I go to the flower shop. And everything is breaking. Izuku sighed to himself as he stood. He went to his bathroom, his feet stomping on the ground with each stride. He stopped in front of his covered mirror, glaring at the tarp before he grabbed it and yanked it off of the mirror. Izuku gasped when he saw his reflection. For once, it made sense. He saw a confused, angry, sad, and broken boy in front of him. And for once he recognized his reflection. So, this is just me, isn't it? Izuku laughed at himself. He ran his hands over his face, prodding and pulling at the skin under his eyes. The clear contrast between the dark circles under his eyes and his pale skin made him grin. Broken boy. Broken Omega. Can't fix him. Izuku sing-songed to himself as he smiled. For once, he didn't mind whom he stared at. His reflection felt familiar. So, maybe that was a good sign. Though out of the corner of his eye, he finally registered his hands and arms. The wounds were a dim red, clearly still irritated, while scabs covered nearly every part of his limbs, making each movement sting and ache as the scabs were stretched. Izuku sighed to himself as he turned on his shower, gently tracing his fingers over the scabs, infatuated at the feel of the dried blood. Once his shower was over, Izuku didn't bother himself to put on a shirt, merely pulling on some pants and letting his wet hair dampen his neck, small droplets running down his back. He grabbed his gauze and bandages and rewrapped his arms and hands the way his father had shown him, humming absent-mindedly to himself while he did so. Only for a loud alert from his phone to startle him. Izuku grabbed his phone, checking through his news apps to see if any new fights occurred, and that's what caused the alert. Only for the bright red dots on his message app to catch his attention. No doubt it was another alert that Kirishima had texted him. Izuku clicked on the app, though being sure to not open the chat so it wouldn't show that Izuku had seen them. Though this time, he was surprised and slightly worried to find that the message hadn't come from Kirishima. Rather, it came from Bakugo. I really can't have peace in my own head because of you both, huh? Izuku chuckled humorlessly to himself before he sighed heavily and clicked on the chat. Where the f are you? Classy, real classy Kaken. Izuku rolled his eyes. He hesitated as his fingers hovered over the keyboard. Should I really text back? Maybe it'd be best if I blocked them until my own head doesn't despise me anymore. Izuku thought to himself, though huffing bitterly at the thought of his own mind. Izuku thought to himself for a minute, weighing his options before the vibration from his phone caught him off guard, making him flinch as he looked back down at the chat. I know you're FNG reading this, nerd. Answer me right the F now. Izuku huffed at the text, though when he finally went to type a response, another text came through, and it nearly made him throw his phone across his room. You're freaking Kirishima out, answer me right now, Diamanit. Or I'm coming there myself, you little sheet. Izuku screamed when he read the text. He had to clutch his phone to keep himself from chucking across his room. He placed his phone on his bed and began to pace around his room anxiously, gripping and tugging at his hair. He knows him. Izuku screamed to himself, his breathing immediately becoming shaky and weak as he desperately tried to draw in the air he needed, trying to keep himself from going into a panic attack. Though anger ran hot in his veins when his breathing finally evened out. Kirishima knew Bakugo. And from past conversations, Izuku knew that Kirishima had mentioned him to his other friends. He told Izuku so himself. Then the idea came to him. Kirishima had spoken about him to Bakugo. That's the only way Bakugo would know that Izuku knew the redhead. And from his own experiences, the blonde never had anything good to say about Izuku. And Kirishima wasn't stupid. He could figure out that Bakugo was most likely the biggest suspect for the bullying Izuku had been facing. But that also meant that he bypassed. It meant that he didn't care. And suddenly, Izuku felt every part of him ache and cry out. Just the same as when Bakugo had said those fatal words. Izuku screamed in pure frustration and agony. The same pain he felt from those baiting words came back, but this time it was multiplied, and this time it hurt worse. And he could hardly handle it. So, when the sound of another alert that the blonde had texted him, Izuku snarled as he turned and grabbed his phone. The last FING chance, answer me right the F now. Izuku scowled at the threat of a text before his fingers flew over his keyboard to create his response. Go away. Izuku glared at the chat, and when the small bubbles in the corner of the screen appeared, he only glared harder. That's the first FNG thing you say? No one sees you for a week and that's what you chose to say first? Go away. Until you give me something more than that stupid response, then I'm not. And you've got 2 minutes to change my mind before I come over and beat your effing butt. Izuku's eyes flooded with hot tears. He choked back the lump in his throat and the screaming urge to let the blonde come over. Please go away, Kaken. Deku, I swear if you don't start talking I'm coming over to beat it out of you. Why do you make things so confusing, Kaken? Izuku cried, wiping his eyes to clear his vision. Nerd, answer me right now. You've got 30 seconds. At that, Izuku screamed in frustration, pressing his phone screen to his forehead before he glared at the messages. I'm not explaining. Goodbye, Bakugo. And before the blonde could be given the chance to respond, Izuku blocked his contact before switching over to Kirishima's chat. Hey Mito, haven't seen or heard from you. Are you okay? Okay, it's been 3 days. Are you okay? Seriously, bro, are you all right? Mito, answer me please. Izuku, for the love of the gods, at least read the text so I know you're alive. Bakugo and I are getting worried. Pick up please. Mito, come on. I'm about to lose my sheet here. Are you okay? Izuku, please answer your phone. The Omega read over the messages quickly, guilt and that same painful ache returning full force. Though the second he saw the small bubbles in the corner of the screen, he panicked and quickly blocked the redhead's contact. Immediately after, he threw his phone away from him as if it had burned his hand. Izuku crumbled to the ground and sobbed, crying bitterly to himself as he clutched his chest, the pain only spreading until every tremor that shook his body made a stabbing pain shoot throughout him. But every moment, his mind raced through his thoughts, throughout his memories. Only one moment stood out, only one truly caught his attention and made his breathing hitch in his throat, despite his lungs burning and crying out for the air they needed so desperately. Heroes. They care about nothing but money and their own glory and fame. None of them do it for the right reason anymore. There are no such things as true heroes anymore. But I don't believe you are like that, young one. What Kurogyari had said to him. No one does it for the right reasons anymore. There was no such thing as a true hero anymore. Could Bakugo and Kirishima truly be like that? Were they truly as cruel as the man that had stranded him on the roof of a skyscraper? The mere thought had his chest somehow clenching in even more agony than before. Finally, the pain subsided, leaving a dull ache in its wake. Izuku groaned as he stood, preferring to walk away from his phone and into the living room where he lay across the couch, closing his eyes and trying to welcome sleep. But just as he nearly drifted off into the sweet land of sleep, the sound of a loud knock rang throughout the living room. Izuku jumped up, his heart immediately pulsing rapidly as his first thought went to that of Bakugo's threat. Sheet. Please say he didn't. Please say he didn't. Izuku whispered to himself, keeping his back pressed against the couch, only to flinch again when the knocking returned, this time louder. Izuku pursed his lips and hesitantly walked forward to the door, his hand shaking as he unlocked the door, slowly opening the door, only allowing the smallest sliver to open. His entire form shook with anxiety. Izuku? You okay, hun? I forgot my keys, can you let me in? Izuku sighed heavily in relief at the voice, opening the door fully as his father stood in the doorway smiling brightly at his son. Izuku smiled back at him. Did I startle you, Buttonflower? Hisashi chuckled as he ruffled Izuku's hair. The boy nodded shakily before the man pulled him into a hug. I must say, I think I like your hair being long, it looks good on you. We'll get it styled a bit if you want to keep it long. Hisashi praised while Izuku smiled at the compliment. Yeah, I think I like my hair a little longer too. Izuku grinned while Hisashi chuckled. Well, I apologize for startling you. But I brought home dinner, let's eat. Hisashi cheered while Izuku sighed and his shoulders dropped from their previous pent-up position. And surprisingly, Izuku felt his appetite come to him. Izuku smiled as his father relayed his day, telling the greenette the funny stories his patients had to tell, and other small laughable mishaps that had happened that day. What about you, Buttonflower? How was your day? Hisashi questioned while Izuku stopped mid-bite, suddenly feeling his nausea return. He looked down at his bowl and practically pleaded with his own mind, begging his appetite to return just long enough for him to eat with his father. Izuku? Would you rather use the journal to tell me? Hisashi asked worriedly, though Izuku quickly forced his smile to return, placing his fork back in his bowl. Nope. Today just felt long as all. I got a little sad. But it was okay. And maybe it was because I was alone most of the day. Izuku stated softly, though Hisashi hummed and nodded. I thought about that too. That's why I think it's best if you start coming to the office with me. You can sit in the lounge and do all your work, and it's not too far from the flower shop, so you could still do your runs. Hisashi offered while Izuku thought to himself for a moment. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Izuku agreed. Hisashi hugged his son and smiled. Good. Things will get better, Izuku, I promise. Hisashi stated while Izuku looked up at his father and smiled sadly. And with that, another routine was broken before it could even begin. Though one thought alone now stood present in his mind. Kurogiri was right, what else was there to be in the world? If not a hero?